The time is 1:04, and we will call this meeting of the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board's Workshop to session. Today is Thursday, November the 20th, 2014, and our first item of business is roll call. We will start with the announcement of board members and then staff, and then I will note absences and get your approvals on those. I'm Jamie Wycliffe. I'm chairing this meeting, and if we'll start to my left, board members.
Walker Beard, board member. Clayton Black, board member, present.
Brian Padden, board member.
Tony Slagle, Government Affairs. Sorry.
That's all right. Next board member.
Mark
I
McAnally,
apologize.
board member.
We'll let you be on the board, Tony.
Sorry.
Jim Jeffries, board member.
Laurie Fontana, board member.
Okay, now if we can have staff announce and start Mark in the back.
TALCB staff, enforcement director Mark Brown.
Now Tony can.
Tony Slagle, Government Affairs. I apologize.
That's all
Obviously
right.
wasn't a
Doug Oldmixon, the commissioner.
Ellen Samuth, Attorney General's Office, General Counsel.
Kristen Warman, general counsel for the board.
And guest.
Joe Waller, FAG.
Joe, thanks for coming. So we do have two board members that are absent. They have both notified the commissioner of their need for absence. One of them has had a flight issue, and that's Mr. Barba, and we expect him to arrive sometime later today. They canceled his flight earlier this morning. And Mr. Carlson, who we do not expect to be here, so we'll ask for approval of those absences.
I'll move we accept the absences of the board members
Excused.
excused.
Okay.
Second.
Motion second. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? I'm not sure we had to get that formal in a workshop session, but we'll just follow the path. First item on our official business is discussion regarding roles and duties of board members, including ethics, limitations on lobbying, and other prohibited activities under Texas law. Ms. Warman, you want to take the lead, or would you like me to? So I guess the letters we do need to start with. So the board, historically, the board has heard conversations at the dais about letters that some board members had received from the governor essentially last year about this time. And so we thought it would be appropriate for everybody to at least see a sample of what one of those letters spoke to. And essentially they were outlining duties of board members and the roles that we play in terms of oversights of the organization. So we wanted to be sure that they were there for your consumption and see if there was any questions or comments associated with them. So essentially we're all trying to get you to the same page for those of us that had received these letters directly. Any questions?
I'd just like to make a comment that whenever I happened to receive the letter, it was just another affirmation of my appointment and what the governor expected. And it was I thought it was really important, and I thought it really helped me see what the governor was asking me to do. So in training purposes, I mean, I think this is a good document to even have in general to see, you know, what a governor is asking an appointee to accomplish during their time appointed. That's it.
I don't know. Are we just looking for comments on that issue, kind of?
I think so. I think we just want to try and get closure. It seemed like the mystery document for some people, because some board members weren't serving at the time the letters came out. So we've had some new appointees, and so we wanted to be sure that when we made reference to the governor's letter, that they had the option of understanding what that was. And then, of course, yes, if you've got comments associated with them.
I know that one of the main points that was made in the special training we went to, in addition to our training by the governor's office, was that this is your board members. This is your board to be, you need to be very involved in oversight of the board. And we got a fabulous staff, very capable people, and they do a fantastic job, but it's still your board to be very involved in. And if you don't understand something, ask the question. Real simple stuff. If you don't understand how the budget's done between us and Tracker, you don't understand how the commissioner's duties are separated you just have to just ask the question.
I think one of the things that's a positive about these appointments is we come from very diverse backgrounds, and we don't get together very often, so we don't get much of a chance to get to know each other, or the process is a little cumbersome, and so it takes a little while to get comfortable, and I think these letters also help give you some of that guidance. Any other questions or comments? Then we will move, Kristen, unless you...
I got a question. I got a letter in the mail this past week regarding the
reappointment.
The reappointment, and that it has to go before the Senate for approval. Do we have to take any action? Do we have to lobby our senator?
No,
or
and I think
anything?
we all probably got those letters, so it's, well, it's not, I think it's close enough to this agenda item to talk about it. So because we have a change in governor, the way I read those letters is you will serve, unless your position was at the pleasure of the governor, you'll serve your term, but if you're interested in being reappointed, because they have a new appointments team, you need to reapply.
What is the term, just to clarify?
I
Our
think they're
terms.
2-year terms with a maximum of 6 years. I should
Okay.
probably let one of the experts.
That's correct. So if we're
With a
coming up,
maximum of 6 years service.
we're coming up on 2 years, then
You may want to reapply.
yeah, let them know.
Yes, and you should have each gotten individual letters. Those of you that are newer appointees may not yet be on the mailing list, but essentially we got, in case you didn't, let me describe it for you. We got letters from Governor Perry thanking us for our service, and then clarifying that if you desired to continue or to be considered for a reappointment, that the team would be different. They might not be aware of your application and you would need to reapply.
It had something to do with the interim legislation too, didn't it? The fact that it was in the...
There are a couple of things that are noted in the letter, and I happened to read Mr. Jeffries because he did make it on the mailing list and he got a letter.
Good.
And so his question was, does he have to reapply? He just got reappointed.
You just got appointed.
Yeah, he just got appointed, and so likely not. However, all appointments made from the end of the last legislative session will be presented to the next legislative session for endorsement. And so that's really the purpose, is that in the interim, so there's two purposes of the letter. If you were appointed in the interim, you need to update your application so it can go to the Senate for affirmation. And then also, since there will be a new governor, if you're coming on the end of your term, and we have 4 members who are reaching the end of their first or second 2-year appointment, that you need to let the new governor know that you would like to continue. And then a reminder, I think, for everyone that you serve until replaced. So the new governor, that may not be the very first thing on the top of his list to make sure that all the appointments, new appointments get done, but they'll get to you. So let them know if you're interested, and then please continue to serve faithfully until replaced.
The 4 members that are up at their end of their second round of term, do you know those off the top of your head?
Yes, I do, but Tony's going to tell me because he went and looked it up. It's Mr. Beard,
Mr. Black.
Mr. Black.
No, I'm just finishing my first.
No, that's but the end of your first 2 years.
Yeah, you're up.
Oh,
2 years.
okay.
Miss Whitcliffe.
Yes.
And
Mr. Carlson.
Mr. Carlson. Yes. Thank you.
I just thought, since we were addressing it, in case you weren't sure where you were in your cycle, I knew mine was up. But. All right. Other questions or comments about either the governor's letters or the ones we've just received from the governor?
Walker, would this be year 6 for you or year 4?
I'm done in February.
In February?
Okay, so there will
I'm
be
term limited out.
Okay.
In fact, that has
Until
been
replaced.
Until replaced.
that has been a public question that has come to me recently by 2 or 3 people, and that is who's coming up. They know that there are some potential appointments. I've explained that we've just filled 1 seat, and that there would be another coming. So I am not, I mean, I am at the end of my 4th year, so I would be coming into my last cycle. Unless, we do have 3 people that have joined us. I believe they're all, one of them's here to see me. And the other 2, if we could just ask you to, actually we'll ask all 3 of you to announce for the record's sake.
Sure. Eric Woomer, and I'm a consultant with FACT. This is Sissy Ellis, and she works with me.
Thank you all for coming. We appreciate you being here. Chris?
I'm Chris Hamblin. I'm with Johns Mars Ellison Hodge.
And he's doing a delivery to me, so we'll,
Madam Chair, if I could just offer one comment, I want to endorse something that is in the governor's letter and assure you that we really do take seriously. This statement says, appointees are duty bound to ask the hard questions. And there's, we serve a public purpose, and this staff serves your implementation of the policy interests that are reflected in the statute and in our rules. And so there are no hard questions. It doesn't matter how, if a question occurs to you, please ask it. So that I was talking to Mr. Jeffries earlier as part of his orientation, and I said, if someone had not asked hard questions, it would probably have taken us longer to implement some very positive changes that we've made over the last few years in our enforcement processes. And it's only because people ask hard questions. And so please, take that, as the governor said, take that duty seriously, and you will not offend us. We'll explain to you what we do, how we do it, and if it's within our purview to change it, General Counsel will obviously tell you where the limitations are, but it's up to you to express those requirements that are in the statute in rules, and that's really where your policy making authority is expressed. So please take that seriously, and don't feel like don't ever hesitate because you don't know an answer.
Go ahead. I was going to make a comment. When I was interviewed by the governor's office for this appointment, my only question to them was, I'll take it, or my only statement to them was, I'll take it only if I can ask some really hard questions. I mean, what was her name, Mary? Will tell you that was the statement that I had. So not only did I like seeing that in the letter, but I will tell the board members, especially the newer ones, I'm sure I'm not the only one he's referring to, but I have asked some really hard questions. And this staff has done an amazing job of making sure that it was not just answered, but I'd like clarification. So sometimes I dig a little bit. So ask them, ask the questions. And no question's stupid. So thank you, Commissioner, because I have done that, and I appreciate staffs, Mr. Marnak, council, all y'all for being so willing to answer them.
Agreed. We all want to, I think everybody in the room's time is valuable, and the way to best use our time is to get involved and ask the questions so that we can make a difference, because I think that's probably what we're all here to do. The reason I tapped you on the arm a second ago is I'm going to ask if I can pass the gavel to you for just a second so I can take the delivery of some information that's come in. I think we're actually to the duties and ethics of the board. Kristen, were you going to make a presentation there?
Yes. In the vein of training and just to carry on the theme and the discussion of the duties and ethics of board members, what I'm handing out to you now is a 2-page memo that summarizes the laws applicable to you as a board member, both under our statute, Occupations Code Chapter 1103, and the board's rules, as well as provisions in the government code. And then in addition to the memo, there is handbook that is put out by the Ethics Commission that is a guide to the ethics laws applicable to all state officers and employees. And the handbook is really meant to serve as a reference guide for you, when you come upon a question. But just to kind of briefly go over the memo, the first set of topics discusses conduct at a board meeting, and under the board's rules, the board has chosen to follow Robert's Rules of Order. And within Robert's Rules of Order, each board member has a right to speak and to state their views and opinions and positions and recommendations. Robert's Rules just cautions that board members should do so professionally and respectfully in a procedural manner established by the chair. There's a duty to listen. You should listen respectfully to the views and positions of other board members, even those that you disagree with. There's also a duty to respect the board's decisions. I mean, once the debate has concluded and the board has made a decision in a matter, the board member should respect that decision and not denigrate that decision outside the context of the meeting afterwards. There's also a duty of confidentiality, and this duty applies not only under Robert's Rules of Order, but also under the Government Code and the Public Information Act. A board member may not report executive session discussions, deliberations, or statements of board members, including your own statements, to any third party that are made in the context of that confidentiality provision without the board's permission. There are civil penalties, both civil and criminal penalties for disclosure of confidential information in violation of the Open Meetings Act. Then the next category is conflicts of interest. And basically the general rule is that you, as a board member and a public officer, shouldn't engage in activities that would create a conflict of interest or even create an appearance of a conflict of interest. And you need to be mindful of the business activities, the employment activities, and the investments that you engage in to make sure that those activities don't create a conflict of interest. And of course, obviously, you may want to be cautious when accepting gifts so that those aren't viewed as a bribe in exchange for some official action that you might take. And then the Government Code has a couple of restrictions that are particularly applicable to state officers and board members. And essentially, these are what we call revolving door provisions. So when you end your service on the board, then there are provisions in the law that prevent you, one, from coming before the board or contacting the board or its members or staff with the intent to influence the board's action on behalf of any person within 2 years after you cease serving on the board. And then also, even after that 2 years, you can't receive compensation for services that you render on behalf of any person on a matter in which you participated as a board member. You can certainly come back to the board and make comments on rulemaking proceedings in your individual capacity. These provisions don't prevent you from doing that, but I wanted to point you also to...
Question on that last part.
Sure.
Can you give me an example?
An example of?
Of what they're talking about. I understand there's no restriction on rulemaking, but what would be an example that would prohibit a board member from doing something in front of the board on?
Maybe one of our attorneys, so maybe one of our public members is an attorney or something coming back and representing somebody with a complaint or something?
Yeah.
You don't have to be an attorney.
You don't have to be an attorney.
You wanted to comment on, you believe that on behalf of a respondent, say, that the board's action was overly punitive or that they're involved in misinterpretation of use tap or something. You couldn't do that.
And if I could point you to page 8 of the handbook at the top, the Ethics Commission has given a couple of examples of how this revolving door provision, the second revolving door provision, applies. In the second paragraph on page 8, it explains that the former board member or an employee that is covered by the provision may never represent a person or receive compensation for services rendered on behalf of any person regarding a particular matter in which he or she participated while serving with the agency. The particular matter is a specific matter before the agency, such as a complaint case or an investigation, a contract, or a rulemaking proceeding, or a request for a ruling. And basically, this provision prohibits you from representing a person or getting paid to help a person regarding that specific matter that you were either personally involved with, or that was a matter within your official responsibility while you were a state officer or employee. It doesn't prohibit you from working on the general types of matters. So,
But I guess what we're talking about, though, is that if a board member happened to be a lawyer for
Yes.
6 years, then they cannot represent the person that they made a decision over on a complaint.
no.
Even,
It's a specific, limited to the specific matter. So, say the board member made a decision in a complaint, and the complaint was then appealed to the courts, to the district court, and then up to the appellate court. And the board member, after making that decision at the board level, left the board. The board member could not then represent that person in that appeal. So couldn't be contracted to be their lawyer
okay,
on the
we're saying the
appeal.
same thing, we just
Yes.
said it differently. Okay, that's right.
So you're saying he can't represent that appraiser in the court of law? I thought we were just saying they couldn't come back before us.
It would be on that particular matter. No, it's representing a person or getting paid to help a person regarding a specific matter.
So
It doesn't
anywhere
matter.
where they're outside the board.
Right.
the duty.
I mean, if that same person were to have another complaint filed against him, and, say 5 years down the road, after this board member had left service on the board, then that board member could represent that person because it's beyond the 2-year prohibition in the first revolving door provision, and it's not regarding a matter that that board member participated in while they were serving on the board.
Okay.
Does
That's
that
why
make sense?
Mr.
So that I was gonna
Whitmer,
say Whitmer.
who once served on this board, can represent others before the board, as long as it's not a matter that ever came up while he served.
And that was my one, so, yeah. And then I just remember being at, was it the May board meeting? At one of the board meetings when Mr. Loftus, addressed the board, and he also comes into some of the committee meetings. So how does that work with this former employee status? There's some
The
things
same
that
way.
he talks directly to. In fact, I don't know if you know it or not, but
He waited 2 years.
I think
oh,
the
okay.
2 years.
So that's it.
That was
All right.
Well, it's
primarily the 2 year.
2 years.
Okay.
right. The revolving door, the first revolving door provision applies if you are a former board member or executive director. And so there's a 2-year prohibition against you coming back. So that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Loftus did not serve on the board. So the 2-year prohibition doesn't apply directly to him.
I think out of an abundance of caution, he purposely waited 2 years before he ever came back to say anything, just to be absolutely positive.
Sure. So it's really the second provision that would apply to him as a former employee, and he just cannot speak to matters that he was personally involved in while he was here as an employee. So, for instance, if we were debating a case on rehearing, and he wanted to come and, he was the investigator that had investigated that case back when it was here before the board. He could not come in and make public comment on the board to sway the board's action on that particular matter.
This is just curiosity question. Or that was a matter within your official responsibility while a state officer or employee. That's where I went ding, because at any time, I'm just reading what this says.
Right.
So to me, the reason I'm making this question is because that says, or within your official responsibility while a state officer and employee. I mean, that's pretty broad.
Well, but it says a specific matter. We have to go back and look at the first part of the sentence. Regarding a specific matter in which you were either personally involved in or was a matter within your official responsibility. So the specific matter had to fall within your official responsibility. And then the next sentence, I think, answers your question more clearly. This does not prohibit you from working on the types of matters, so the category of matters that you worked on while you were at the agency. Okay. The Ethics Commission handbook also speaks to those lobbying prohibitions and when you can accept gifts from lobbyists and what the dollar value of those gifts might be and when the lobbyist actually has to be present and what you can and can't do with respect to lobbyists. But I just wanted to give this to you as an informational resource, so when you have questions, you can either refer to the handbook or certainly give myself a call if you have specific questions.
And in the future, we're including this in all of the orientation binder.
It was included, Mr. Jeffries.
Fantastic. Great.
You have 2 sets in case you lose.
And then the only other thing I would say on this topic is, since we have several new board members on the board, many times you're approached on the street or in a class or in your daily business by someone who wants to talk to you about an appraisal question. And one of the things you have to be mindful of is, well, does this involve an issue that is going to come before me as a board member? And so when somebody starts talking to you and says, hey, I've got some questions for you, can you talk to me about this? You might want to just ask, okay, hey, before you go any further, is this something that is related to the board? Is it a matter that's pending before the board? And if they say, well, yeah, it is. I got this complaint against me, or, a friend of a friend got this complaint filed against me, then, my advice to you is simply to politely ask whoever you're talking to say, I appreciate the concern that you're trying to raise, but I'm just not at liberty to speak to you as a board member on this topic. And, if you have any more questions about it, I'm happy to refer you to our general counsel. And if you want to give them my name and email and phone number, I'm happy to answer their questions.
Kristen, while we're on the topic, because it does come up periodically, you may receive that communication by email. Can you go ahead and describe what your preferred handling of that is as well?
If you receive the communication by email, my preferred handling of that would be to forward the email to me and then to delete it, with a note saying I received this email. I'm going to delete it from my end. If you would please follow up with this individual, and I'll be happy to reach out and talk to the individual.
Want us to copy that individual too when we send it to you?
You can certainly do that if you want to, or if it makes you feel uncomfortable, that you don't want to give the individual the impression that you're blowing him off or
Right.
that you're,
Yeah.
shifting him to another person. You don't have to copy the individual, but whatever your personal preference is, that would be fine.
And Jim, you will get those calls.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, you will.
Yes,
That's-
you will.
And different organizations have different ways of handling it. In the past, in my service, they just wanted us to delete it and make a phone call. And so that's why I wanted you to hear the preferred handling in this organization.
Yeah, they're gonna call you and start trying to plead their case and say, wait, I gotta recuse myself. You can't say anything more. Let me refer you to general counsel.
Never thought of that.
And you'll never take an appraisal class the same way again.
Now, yeah, be prepared if you have any continuing education going on. It's always fun the very first time they announce that the board member is in the room, and we will be taking no unusual breaks. And they do all of that with the announcement. Every question or problem then gets directed at you, but it's fun.
So-
Any other comments?
Yes, just one other matter that's not included here, and I thought this would be a good time to talk about it, and that's restrictions on all of our board members and staff members activities regarding the legislature. So the legislative session is upcoming, and agencies and board members are prohibited from lobbying for the passage or defeat of a specific provision that will come before the legislature. So you might ask, well, we have a whole legislative wish list, right, of things that we would like to see, and it's not inappropriate for agencies to compile those, and also to coordinate with, in this case, the association, the Foundation Appraiser Coalition of Texas, a group of professional associations that take it as their responsibility to ensure that the laws in Texas actually work for appraisers and for the agency. And so we have a very close working relationship with them. It is their role, and it is appropriate for them to lobby as much as they want within the lobby restrictions that apply to them. However, our role always, when appearing to testify or appearing at a hearing and making ourselves available, is we're there to answer questions, okay? We're there to provide information. And in fact, we have in the past met with specific sponsors of bills and folks who have objections to specific provisions in bills to provide information about, what does that mean? What would the impact of that be on the agency or the profession or whatever? Without, and to answer the questions as objectively as possible, without being seen as lobbying for or against a particular provision. So.
And is Tony the one that pretty much has the majority of those conversations with those people?
Myself or Tony, or to the extent that, and this has happened in the past, a representative of the board wants to be available as a resource to speak from what impact that would have from their perspective, policy perspective with the board. That's also been welcomed, but they're there in the same role, which is as a resource for the legislature.
And does this lobbying effort just apply to appraisal board business?
Oh, no,
So I couldn't
all
lobby
state
for
agencies.
something associated with the engineering board or environmental regulations?
If
or-
you don't serve on that board, then you can. Yes.
Okay.
Within your duties here.
That's what I
That's
was
right.
specific.
Right. So as an engineer, yes, if they wanted to abolish engineering as a licensed profession or whatever, and you had an opinion about that, you're welcome to go over and talk about that.
Good. Other questions? Comments? you might imagine these workshops come as a result of a desire to educate and questions that have come up over the course of the last, 2 or 3 years. And so that's the reason that we're here, is to kind of get clarification and education. Kristen, does that conclude that portion of the agenda?
It does.
We'll move to agenda item number 4, which is discussion regarding TALCB committees. And essentially, this is a general overview of the committees that are currently active in this organization. I've asked each person that's got a leadership role in those committees, in most cases, that would be the chair of the committee, to give a 10-minute overview generally of what the committee is made up of and what they are working on. I will be yielding a big portion of my 10 minutes to Mr. Walker Beard because the executive committee report is going to be relatively short. The executive committee is essentially made up of the secretary, vice chair, and chair. I think in the statute, Kristen's called it to my attention that it's presiding officer and assistant presiding officer, but essentially we call those positions chair and vice chair. So currently serving on your executive committee is Mark McAnally as secretary, Ms. Fontana as vice chair, and I'm serving as your chair. Globally, we just handle special assignments from the board. Essentially something that comes up that needs some vetting that's not appropriate in some other committee generally lands at the executive committee level. So whatever fits logically is generally what we take up. In the last year, we've reviewed every board policy. That was fun. The last of them will be part of a report that you'll see tomorrow. So we've essentially done a big overview there. We also began this year with what I call a comprehensive list of board concerns. We were given it seemed like about a 4-page document. I think it probably was only about a page and a half of bullet points of things that were had been floating around and that we needed some conclusions on. So we've handled that comprehensive list. We started in January and just now have finished that list. The biggest things I think that we handled amongst a lot of small things was the process for nominations of officers was fully vetted at the executive level and then recommended to the board, and discussion and action was handled last board meeting. The travel reimbursement was a long-standing conversation about what was appropriate and how we might need to set those up in the future, and having expectations and setting some standards. And then the process of placing items on the agenda. Those were the things that hit my radar screen of things that took us a little time or that were more conversation-oriented, that came from your executive committee, and recommendations have already been forthcoming to the board, and board has taken action on those items in the past. But the floor is open if there were things that you had questions about or were unclear about whether we handled, or any questions about the executive committee. I do appreciate the service of the folks that have served with me this year. We've had quite a long set of agenda, and we've been meeting by telephonic conference, and that has proven to be efficient, but it does take a great deal of time from the individuals serving on that committee. We seldom have a meeting that's 20 or 30 minutes. They are mostly 3 or 4 hours, usually 2 or 3 hours if it was. So I appreciate the service of my fellow committee members.
One of the other things that you all did that was very instrumental was trying to get the complaint process so it was, I don't want to say more favorable, but it was so that if a complaint was filed, it didn't automatically go into the go position. And I'm not saying all this right, but there was
enforcement. Yeah, and that's so some of the personalities
I'm in the wrong side.
crossovers.
Okay, that's in your
It did.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Ms. Fontana and I served on enforcement, and then executive did take up some pieces of that puzzle over time. But I think probably the biggest vetting of that occurred over the course of a couple of years at the enforcement level with the staff and the enforcement committee. Yes, sir.
I would also like to bring up to the board members, and it doesn't really fit, but it's just a good time to bring it up because you'll probably see it in the meeting tomorrow, and that is we do a lot of rulemaking. But the legislature, it's a requirement every 4 years that agencies review all of their rules, and so we're wrapping all of that up now. And so rulemaking is very predominant this last year because we've been going through all of them, and the staff and Doug have taken them and broken it down into pieces, about 4 pieces, I believe, if that's right, to go through. And so we'll be voting on those measures. That's not to say that rulemaking stops after that, because whenever the feds make a new requirement, then we have to change our rules. And then where it gets really uncomfortable, or when there are points in time when it needs a change in statutes, but our legislature meets only once every 2 years, and that was something that was a learning curve for the appraisal subcommittee when they came in and audited us. But it never quits, but it's just really at a ramped up stage right now.
Thanks for that additional information. I do think that's helpful. Any other questions or comments for your executive committee or concerns?
Madam Chair, if you're ever unsure who's on the executive committee, just come in the room and it's the 3 pictures on top.
Keep it simple, that's helpful.
Some people learn visually.
So, as promised, Mr. Beard, I'll yield a little time to the Budget Committee.
Well, unfortunately, I didn't know I was going to make a presentation
Oh,
about
okay.
the Budget Committee. But Patrick Carlson, Brian Padden, and myself are on the Budget Committee. And there is a specific policy and procedure for the Budget Committee to follow as far as going through the process. And I forgot, we have to have it ready for presentation to the board for review. And if there's any changes or, and then we wait till the next board meeting to approve the budget for the following year.
So we're coming into a budgetary time frame, or just concluding. It seems like it's always in the process, because we do have a window that starts with planning.
And everybody needs to get their input into the board as to what their thoughts are on that. The allocation of our building facilities and our technology and that's a real integral part of the Budget Committee to understand, just so you all know how we're more efficiently operated with being with Trek, and we share so many resources, and how that is allocated is real important for the Budget Committee and for you all to know how that process takes place. Gosh, and we reported some really important things. We don't want to get into the specific things, but the big picture of the possibility of a building and funds that are being allocated for continuing education
And we gave some money back.
We're giving money back, and but there was a lot going on this last time that we reported, and there's a lot. So there's a lot of things going on in the Budget Committee right now that will be unfolding over the sequence of the next several meetings. But
we'll continue to keep you posted. I'm sorry that I surprised you, Mr. Beard. I don't think I've surprised anybody else with the agenda. Mr. Black has agreed to give you a report for the Education Committee. That has previously been shared by Mr. De La Garza, who has recently been replaced. And so I had asked Mr. Black to jump in and give the report for the Education Committee.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
before you move off of budget,
Yes, sir.
can I just add a couple of things? The budget development cycle runs essentially after the February meeting, so it's March through August. So at the May meeting, so the committee begins its work, staff begins its work in March, the committee in April, and the first draft budget is presented at the May meeting, the regular May meeting. And then there's intensive opportunity for, answering questions, whatever. There's an additional work session prior to the August meeting. There's input requested during essentially the June, between the May meeting and the end of June. And by July 15th, that proposed final budget is available, and then it's presented and if not amended, adopted at the August meeting for implementation starting September the 1st. So as Mr. Beard said, it's an extended process, and it's one of those that It does require the asking of a lot of hard questions, or I just don't understand this. Explain to me what's in this line item, kind of thing. And we're happy to do that, and then adjust or make recommendations. This body certainly has the ability to express its opinion. There is a formal written interagency agreement, a memorandum of understanding between the commission and the board that deals with the allocation of all of those support services and how, which costs are directly allocated to the board, which ones are shared, and how they're shared. And so those things are in that memorandum, and that's part of what's within the budget committee's purview. So.
May I, one other thing, the process that Commissioner just lined out, I happened to be on the tail end of that when that was developed, but it turned out to be very instrumental because we had also gained SDSI status. And if you remember, a large component on that, which not only board members had questions, and if we had it, you know that the appraiser members or appraisal community had it as well, is that we established a reserve that we were building up as well. You know, just as a safety precaution, every good company or industry would have a reserve component. So that took a lot of explaining over the course of time. That the comment period for board members was open on the budget as well. So it kind of got tested by fire and trial right there at the very beginning. So it's a good process.
Well, and in light of the fact that you brought something up and it has caused us to have some comments or questions related to audit, Doug, can you go ahead and just address what is SDSI?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because
so we are
acronyms killed me the first 15 months of my service. So I was like, wait, what is that?
We were extremely fortunate from fiscal year 12 on to gain control over our own budget. And by that I mean that the agency was granted self-directed semi-independent status, which then puts budget responsibility in the hands of the policy-making board or commission. And so within the purview of your jurisdiction, you're also responsible for making sure there are sufficient funds to carry it out. So raising fees if necessary, or in this case, at the end of our third year of SDSI status, actually rebating fees or reducing fees to our license holders. And so January 1st, if final action is taken tomorrow, there is a proposal out there to reduce the license renewal fees. So it also requires us to pay for all of the services. So the flip side of that freedom, if you will, to control your own budget is that you also have to pay. The law says that it cannot cost the state of Texas any money. So to the extent that we use services, like for example, the Attorney General is here as a representative today, we actually transfer funds. Other state agencies would not do this. Transfer funds from our treasury to the Attorney General's office for
Not to me.
the time. Not to you personally. Right? To the Attorney General's office. We pay for all the services we receive at the State Office of Administrative Hearings. When we are audited by the State Auditor's Office, which we were this year, we pay for those services. We pay the State Office of Risk Management. We pay them as well. We pay for banking services at the Treasury from the Comptroller. So we operate in many ways like a business. We pay rent to be in this building. We're the only agency in this building that pays rent to be here. And then we also pay for something called SWICAP, which is the Statewide Cost Allocation Plan, SWCAP, which is a general assessment for the higher functions of government that is assessed to all agencies. So the governor's office, the legislature, several other, the legislative budget board and a few other folks, as well as some other occupancy-related expenses here in this building. We pay for, we carry our own weight. Okay. So,
Thanks for that,
You
briefing,
bet.
because I do think that is something that's unusual about this organization, and sometimes it's kind of lost in the mix. Any other comments about budget? Questions? Mr. Black, you're up. Education.
All right, the Education Committee met on Thursday, October 23rd, 2014 at 1 o'clock. We met via teleconference. The members that comprise the Education Committee are Mr. Luis de la Garza, which has just rotated off, as I assume, and then Walker Beard and myself, Clayton Black. So it's unfortunate that we're losing Mr. de la Garza because the majority of what I'm going to be speaking to, I believe he formatted it. So I'll be doing my best to present it, but Walker, please jump in at any time. As I recall, the basis of the conversation, most of it was between you and Mr. de la Garza. So there was 4 basic items that we looked at and discussed. So I'll try to run through them individually. The first one was discussion and possible action regarding resources needed for approval of education courses. And basically, and I'm going to look at my notes here and what I ran with at the time. So this was of the premise that we don't have an in-house individual that can approve USPAP courses for the state of Texas. So what we were discussing was, well, first of all, we're having to go to Washington, D.C. or a neighboring state.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so the idea was to try to come up with an in-house individual that could do this. So we were trying to create a position, or looking at the possibility of creating a position in Texas that can do this. And additionally, we would have to come up with, pursue revenue to create this position. So Walker, if there's something you would like to add.
I think too that this is a part of our, it's kind of, it's rolled into a lot of things because I believe it requires a statute change, and it includes the ability for we would have a person on staff like a Margarita White type or a Gwen Jackson type that would be able to accept in these syllabuses from appraisal continuing education providers, and they would have the authority then to make the decision whether it passed the test of all the components we needed to be compliant with appraisal foundation requirements, which we don't have that authority. I think is the case right now. We don't have that authority right now. And also, a part of this kind of rolled into this too is the the proposal that staff will also be able to provide continuing education. Staff or board members actually will be able to provide continuing education. For instance, when Mark Burnack or Doug can make a presentation to a trade organization currently as a 2-hour presentation of where are all the hot spots in USPAP that are deficiencies, and what's new and exciting in the current legislation going on in Texas. They would be able to offer that as continuing education to the members that participate in those seminars, which they can't currently do. You can't currently, as a board member or staff, give educational offerings and have it count for continuing education. And so that's going to go forward as a part of this next legislative session. In fact, it's going to write into some of the, and let's see, and then that person, so that kind of, it's a little off the subject of that, but that person, yes. And in Texas, and we asked staff if they would like, I thought that was a good idea, and they're real enthusiastic about being able to have that authority to make the approval of courses that are presented to them for Texas continuing education. And then I'm guessing then if we have reciprocity now with other states, like Clayton said, so then that would be the same going forward. If we approve it here, I'm guessing it would be approved in Oklahoma or New Mexico or other states.
Sound good to everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Good job. Thanks, guys.
Okay, question, and I don't know, maybe this is something for the meeting tomorrow, but I thought the AQB was approving courses now.
That's what he meant when he said the
DC.
foundation.
The
The foundation.
NDC.
Right. It is AQB,
Uh-huh.
yes.
And so, if they're approving all the courses by the providers, is there a need for us to do anything? Well, I guess it would be like if they're having seminars or something like that, okay.
We had the
So
same
they do
discussion.
national courses?
That's right, okay.
But if they want to just do a
Like a
Texas,
chapter or
Right,
something like
exactly.
that, okay,
Exactly.
I got you.
So it's just kicking the idea around. I mean,
Yeah,
it's-
yeah.
Okay, the second thing we discussed was, all right, discussion and possible action regarding development of voluntary appraiser training review program. Okay, so the idea here is to come to the board, ask the board to potentially allow trainees to submit their work on a voluntary basis to enforcement department for review, and so as to make sure that they are in USPAP compliance. And I'm sure Mark can get all involved in this, or whoever would like to, but that was the basic premise there. Is that
Yeah, I think so. The idea was to have okay, so in 2015, we roll out the trainee and sponsor continuing education that's mandated that we do, and that's on track through the Education Committee, has got that ready to go, and we have a provider that's identified an interest in making that available. And then you can, then we're talking about allowing trainees to periodically, I don't know if we defined a timeline, but like maybe once every year or so during their trainee time to submit without recourse a sample work. And they would submit their log to the investigators, and the investigators would pick some assignments off of that, take a look at them and say, well, look, you're a little bit weak here, you're strong here, and give it back to them. Now, if there are dramatic problems, then they're compelled to do something, particularly in the part because they're under a supervision. But the idea would be to, without recourse, they could get their comments and feedback from the investigators to give them a heads up of what it will be like when they do submit officially. And then Doug had mentioned that if you have that in your state, if you have a training program for trainees, that we currently have it so you can only sponsor 3 trainees is the law. And then, if I understood it correctly, if we implement this system and this program, this ability to do this, then that will lift that restriction and that you would be able to sponsor more trainees. Isn't that correct?
The board would have the authority if the program of both education and monitoring was approved by AQB. So we would have to describe it to them. They would approve it, say, yes, this meets our requirement. Then the board would have the authority to authorize additional trainees beyond the 3 per certified appraiser. That's a current AQB limit unless you have an approved training and monitoring program.
In your state.
Right.
And to me, I think it's a great idea for people to get the feedback as they go along. The downside is that, well, what if they find, if their sponsor is doing something blatantly wrong, which obviously the chances of that happening aren't going to be so, but the investigators are going to have to take, if it's obviously fraudulent or grossly negligent, then I think you would have to do something. But for the idea would be to, in good faith, just give them feedback, constructive feedback.
So the monitoring, that, I like that word. That would be something different than the training part? I mean, it's that
It's
and that.
education and monitoring.
And, okay. Is that by any,
It's on the agenda. I would think it would be more appropriate to be
Okay, never mind.
discussed at the meeting on the agenda.
just saw a word I hadn't seen before, so, and that was it. All right, so it would be not and or, it would be and. Okay.
Correct.
All right. And just FYI, that whole idea came from education and enforcement speaking to each other about an idea of how to hopefully solve a problem that's out there with people not wanting to take on trainees. You know, it was too risky. It was too, you're too vulnerable. So,
Would the people that were doing the review, would that be a staff position or more or less, or would it be volunteer appraiser positions?
They would,
Your thought on it, I mean.
yeah, no, they would submit their log to the investigators.
Oh, okay.
And the investigators would identify 2 reports or whatever they felt was necessary to pull those reports. They would send it in just like they would be doing when they're seeking to become certified or licensed. And they would review the work and give them their comments.
Well, again, I'm such a novice, I don't know whether this question makes any sense, but does our investigators have the capacity to take on that additional work?
I think they felt like they could surround it.
I'm not against it, I think it's a great idea.
I think it's a great idea. I think they figure they can, you know, I don't know what the turnaround time would be, or I think we did talk about a turnaround time. And once they submit it, Mark, do you remember if we tried to come up with a response time on if somebody did want to do this voluntary submission?
I don't think we've worked on it.
I was gonna say, I think we're probably developing all of that,
Yeah,
and,
probably.
Yeah,
and
but
it all
I-
goes into budget and all kinds of other things. So I think it is something that is in the works and good, in terms of an overview, it's something that we need to be aware of, is on our radar screen, we're trying to work on it, but
Yeah, that's
I don't think we're trying to vet it all
Yeah.
today.
No, I understand.
Okay, so moving forward, the next one that we discussed here was, this was one individual, as I recall, for the most part. Discussion and possible action regarding policy of awarding ACE credit for USPAP course only when taken during the appraiser's renewal cycle. So, Douglas, feel free to jump in on this one at any time. But as I understand, it was regarding one person basically, and that he was asking for us to make an exception for his renewal since it was done close to his date the previous year. Did I get that?
Close enough.
Yeah, he basically was wanting us to make an exception. So in a nutshell, we said no. We're just going to enforce our current rules. So if that's enough on that one. The next and final discussion was discussion and possible action regarding amendment to Rule 153.21, applying course requirements to all sponsors and trainees. So 153.21, basically, as I understand it, says all sponsors, trainees must take a certified class. So the bullet points that I have listed were, existing sponsors and trainees must take the class due to abuse, as, I'm quoting Mr. De La Garza somewhat here, and educate existing sponsors and trainees. And the basic action that we came up with is that we voted to make them take the appraiser trainee sponsor course at least once every 4 years. I believe that was the motion and second to it and so forth.
And that recommendation is on your agenda tomorrow.
It is. Walker, do you want to add something?
Is this a part of that, if we have this, that facilitates this trainee sponsor capacity in the state of Texas? Is that one of the requirements?
Yes.
Would be part of the requirement? That's an ongoing, so that if you want to have more trainees, you can, that's one of the ways you can lift your 3 trainee limit, is if you continue to take the course.
Well, making it mandatory for all sponsor-trainee relationships is the recommendation. And that would be a requirement for a compliant program that in order for AQB to say, yes, you have an effective training, the education part, and then the monitoring part involves the submission of reports, things like that. So.
But the having to take it every 4 years, would that be a part of that? I mean, that wouldn't be a requirement. That's just something we're imposing, but the AQB wouldn't necessarily think that was necessary, or right or wrong?
Well, AQB has not approved any states program yet. Okay?
Yeah.
The AQB requirement right now is for all new relationships entered into after January the 1st. We're taking that one step further and saying all existing relationships also, at least the recommendation is, if approved, effective September 1 of 2015, when you renew, if you are either a trainee or a sponsor, you have to have taken the class once in the last 4 years, each time you renew.
So you could have a sponsor that has a trainee that's been taking 6 years to get their experience and/or education done and has to take this course
Twice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just for, yeah. So this could go back on, quite a few people back in time.
So, on the back end, these people that are becoming trainee all the way up to December 31st, technically they're exempt from this, but they'll get it if they're within their renewal cycle.
They're exempt from the AQB requirement.
The stages.
However, the state is recommending that we, starting September 1st, that we make them, if they enter into the new relationship after January 1st, you have to take it. But for all those existing relationships, effective September the 1st, at the time of renewal, you had to have taken it once in the last 4 years.
That's about the.
That's a good overview, and that's a good overview of kind of what we'll be seeing tomorrow on the agenda as well, but that's generally follows what the Education Committee's been working on over the course of the last year. I've had a request for a break, so we will call for a break about 10 minutes after 2. Yeah. If you guys can try and return in 8 or 10 minutes, please.
Yes.
You guys reassembling, the time is 2:21 and we are back together. I believe we finished with education unless there were questions that came up. Hearing none, we'll move to enforcement. And we'll just let you segue, Ms. Fontana, when you finish enforcement after all the questions, feel free to move on into AMC advisory.
Okay. The Enforcement Committee was established, if I'm correct, in 2011?
That's about right.
I'm looking. And that committee is made up of 3 board members. It started, at my recollection, with Ms. Wycliffe, myself, and past board member Shannon McClendon. And I believe Jamie was the original chair when it began, and was for 3 years. The Enforcement Committee was charged to address some issues that were coming to the board from the public, and we were asked to look at those issues and work with staff, enforcement staff, to address them. Some of the things that we did do is we addressed the complaint caseload, because back in 11, whenever the Enforcement Committee started, we were on the tail end of having quite a few complaints, and the ASC, we were going through an audit at that time, and we were really trying to, went that the year that we were really trying to make those cases go away quicker than.
Well, we'd been in trouble for a while.
Yeah.
We'd never been in compliance.
Right.
We'll say it that way.
Okay. So it was one of the things we were charged with. The other one was working on the complaint process, the actual process of how a complaint was not only entered into or accepted by the agency, but the flow to that. And we worked on a great thing, a flow chart that took up, what, 1.5 years of committee meetings. But we got there, and Tony is a master of flow charts. Yeah. And we appreciate that. But I think it's a great tool. We uploaded it to the website, and you can have now a visual of the complaint process and a flow chart. And it also is, I believe, a very good tool to help the Enforcement Committee and staff be able to talk through some issues that were being brought to the board. We also worked on becoming more transparent with not just the public, but with the board. So we asked staff to develop some reports that gave us stats on the complaint process. And that really helped with, as they were given their reports, instead of just seeing numbers, to know what those numbers consisted of. So instead of just 200 complaints, we wanted to know, where those complaints were coming from, how were they initiated, how quickly or how long did it take them to be resolved, which ones went to dismissal, contingent dismissal, great order, so on. So that, I believe, has helped the board in general and as whole to be able to see where the enforcement staff is at any given quarter in their work and how that's progressing. Some of the issues that were brought to the enforcement committee in the beginning that we were charged to address were public perception. There was a public perception that was brought to the committee that the public was just worried about things that were being said or alleged about staff being heavy-handed, disrespectful, deceptive. And so I think that's where some of these hard questions were asked, but we also were able to be very transparent with the public and be able to address those things in open board meeting and discuss them. And also, again, it gave us very good dialogue, I believe, with the commissioner and enforcement staff to talk about the perception that was being told to us that the public had. And that, there again, helped us to come into transparency. And one of the things that I do know about the transparency issue is that we looked at and vetted the need and the practice of just
Jurisdictional exception.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can't ever get that word out of my mouth. That was one of the big things that the enforcement committee took on. We wanted to find out what it was, how we were using it, did we need to use it, and we came to the suggestion as a committee to the board that we no longer felt like that was an applicable exception for staff to be.
We clarified the way it would be addressed in an investigative process, and that there are appropriate places for jurisdictional exception, but there was some gray area about the way they were showing up in the review process, or at that time, I think it might have had a quasi-name review process. We now call it investigative process, but I think we just vetted that, cleaned it up, and made the recommendations.
There you go. And along with that also was developing a more a matrix that you could actually follow. We had had some concerns even from staff telling us that the ALJs were having a hard time determining the administrative law judges that were hearing the SOA cases were confused about what our matrix was, because it was all in a chart, right, in the beginning. And so staff did a great job of taking that chart and not only bringing it together and making it in word order, but also the matrix, you could see how there was different levels. So if you had one offense, two offenses, the level of that offense within the first occurrence or whatever. That was something that we really spent quite a bit of time on. And then the other thing that we were charged with was the accountability to the public of Texas. So we did confront and have confronted some allegations. And like I said earlier, those allegations, once given to the commissioner, have always been handled in a very quick manner. And a lot of times we vet them right there at the enforcement committee table. And staff has been nothing but willing to talk those allegations through and take accountability and onus on them to clear up anything that might be perceived as something besides what they're tasked to do. We amended some rules. There's so many rules that we amended, but we amended a lot of rules. One of the things that I think has helped the enforcement committee be as productive as it has been public involvement of the trade and the industry. We've had quite a few public members come in from FACT and some of the other organizations, and even just appraisers, and give their input on certain issues. And I believe that that has been huge in the success of our effectiveness and efficiency. To sort of kind of dovetail on education, we found through that 3-year process that a lot of our the perception that we had there, a lot of the allegations tended to come back around to education of not just the appraiser, but not just the public, but the appraiser. So we started finding out, this is just a lack of communication. We understand one thing, they are running on a different idea, so let's educate them. Let's let them know, what it is. So we started doing things like publishing FAQs on our website and becoming, again, more transparent but accountable to the public when they did bring us those concerns to say, well, listen, we'll talk it out and we'll get back with you. But it always seemed like education was what would be the main fix, just letting people know. Currently, we are moving towards, again, more transparency and ways of producing the form, the complaint intake form, as we have now labeled it. And we just submitted that form. Won't be at tomorrow's meeting as our recommendation to the board. It's been it's in y'all's materials, and we've with staff reading through it and us trying to be clearer and more transparent there about what we mean when that complainant is filing that complaint. Again, education has improved. I think just publishing the flow chart on the website gives us the ability to just point people to that process. So again, like Mr. Olmixon said about if you want to know who the secretary is of TALC, you got some visual learners, so I think that was a good tool. Just to let you know about some current issues that we're dealing with right now. For some reason, over the past couple of quarters, staff-initiated complaints has become a topic of conversation and something that we've been vetting for the last 2, I know, meetings, if not 3. Public perception was that staff was creating work by initiating their own complaints. However, that's the reason that I think the discussion at the table is so important. When Mr. Marnack or the commissioner can tell us how these complaints came about, then we can address the public with those concerns with facts instead of just the. And I think they deserve to have those questions answered. The training and sponsor program that's carrying forward. We've talked a lot about how we can help support the trainee program and the sponsor program. We don't want them, the public, to take staff-initiated complaints and turn it into a reason to not have a trainee. Make sure that that's something that's tackled right there, because it's the future of the Texas appraisal industry. And we have that, we're tasked with that. Alongside of that, the mentorship program, I think, has been really important on the enforcement side as a tool to help fill in that gap that was being presented to us between the sponsor and the trainee. There was an obvious gap. When you have a sponsor that has taken on the responsibility to bring somebody up, mentor them, and we were getting in some evidence that was showing them not getting very good education and mentorship on how to be a good Texas appraiser. So I think our mentorship program has really helped do that, and the mentorship program is something that is on our agenda now. We're trying to vet out what those qualifications of a mentor should be. So that's something that we're currently working on. I think that's just about it as far as some history and some current stuff. And Mr. Waller, you have a question?
A couple of comments, and there'll be compliments, so bear with me a little bit. I believe it was in the February board meeting of 2012. There was an issue came up on complaints being complaints. And fact that asked also that process be looked at very hard, since it hangs over your head for your life, as long as somebody knows how to fill out the form and properly file it, even if it's dismissed out of hand. Anyway, previous council spent a lot of time on it, coming up with a plan, because we were having a session coming up 2013. We didn't want to open to make a statutory change, but came up with the complaint intake form and the investigation before it would become a formal complaint and go on your permanent record. And that was, to me, I think it went into effect May of 2013. And to me, that was a big change for a lot of people.
Good.
The other thing is, and that was, you're talking about perceptions. There was a couple of our officers that were concerned about people saying, you know, they went into an informal deal and, you know, they got sandbagged because they didn't know it was going to be that. Tony sent me a copy of the letter that y'all send with the package to them. I forwarded it to each of them. I never heard a word after that, except the only word I heard was, if they read that letter, there should be no surprises as to what that meeting is about.
Well, that letter was developed in committee,
Yes.
and with a lot of input from staff, and because everybody has the same common goal, and that is to be sure we're getting good information out there.
But regardless of what you call it, if they read that letter, they knew it's a serious meeting, or had the potential to be. But as far as perceptions, you're never going to get it completely away from people thinking that you're being overly cruel to them. And so I compliment both the enforcement committee and the board itself and staff for all the work on those items.
And that particular document that Mr. Waller's pointing to is in our materials. I mean, that has been a living, breathing document, that intake form. So if y'all haven't looked at it and the changes on it, I would just, you know, encourage you to take a look at it and see if the way that it reads, especially to the non-appraiser members, if it reads pretty clearly.
Well, that process change plus the contingent dismissal idea that went in the 2011 cleanup bill helps a whole lot, where people don't have problems for the rest of their life.
And what Mr. Waller's speaking of is some of the appraisers that were having complaints filed against them were running into issues with E&O insurance and even work with clients. They were being blacklisted from their clients' work simply because a complaint was filed. So
Court cross-examinations too.
Right.
Now they can honestly say no formal complaint
Exist.
unless they have one.
That's true.
So that's what I was going to clarify, is that if you have a complaint filed, then the complaint intake form is prior to having it recognized as a complaint. Formal complaint. And I guess I didn't grasp the significance of it. I grasped the significance of it, but I thought it had to be a statutory change to allow us to be able to do that. And because I know the state bar does do that they have complaints filed and they don't hit the threshold of being a complaint until after their preliminary review, and then it either gets off or on. But we do have that. Okay. For some reason, I thought we still had to report it. It just didn't get into the.
Well, where the process was getting difficult for the appraiser was not on the agency side. It was the fact that whenever you went to go renew your E&O, the E&O insurance companies had a question: do you or have you ever had a complaint filed against you? Well, technically, if you had a complaint filed against you, you had to check yes.
Yeah, so we,
So
so
that's-
it is so, but we don't, it is not a complaint, no is the answer. As long as it got kicked out at the preliminary intake form level.
Well, yes, but there again, I'm going back to education, because what we did have to see is that some of this was the appraiser's responsibility to explain to the E&O insurance, just because it's filed doesn't mean that anything has been decided yet. And that was a business, go ahead.
If I may, just because I don't want people to fill out, get false information out there and have to fill out renewal forms wrong, that if a complaint is filed, it's still a complaint, it's an initial complaint. And then after 90 days, we have to triage it under the rule, determine whether or not it's going to become a formal complaint as stated
So
in the
does it
rule.
go on the Federal Register or wherever we put everything? We don't, it doesn't?
No.
It's not unless it's
The
punished.
Federal Register, we only report formal discipline, which is an agreed order or a SOA decision. But I don't want false information to get out there and then somebody file a renewal and not check that they had a complaint against them when they did, and then they end up getting disciplined for not disclosing it. So if a complaint is filed with this agency, it's still a complaint. It's just an initial complaint and not a formal complaint, which I think, I'm not certain if you guys can make a difference in reporting that to insurance carriers or not. I don't know.
And that's where I was going. So the appraiser now has to really just take the responsibility of explaining to the E&O insurance company, look, I've got one filed against me, but there's been either no action, or if there has been action and it's been dismissed, then you have a dismissal letter.
Well, Doug, isn't it, am I right or wrong in saying that the state board handles it differently? That is, it is not a complaint filed against attorney.
No, that is true, and when we get to the legislative thing, we actually have a terminology correction in the statute proposed. If, in fact, we'll, carry forward with that, that changes that to allegations. There's allegations,
Okay.
and then at some later point, it becomes a complaint.
Okay, yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about, because I thought that was where we're headed, but it had to be a statute change to be able to get it.
In order to correct the terminology to reflect the practice, so Mr. Murnack is right. Right now, it's still called a complaint intake form. If we get this changed, get the statutory change, then we can change that terminology formally as well. But also is in the handling of the complaint, that triage period allows for us to dismiss a complaint without ever notifying the individual that a complaint was filed. And so they can truthfully say no, because they were never notified. They don't even know that it was filed. So we changed that process up to be helpful in that regard as well.
Yep.
The rule changes with a stopgap, basically.
That's right.
So we wouldn't have to open the statute back
Yeah,
to
that's
back.
what I thought the way we were. And the other thing I was going to say to the new board members is that we don't call them informal settlement conferences anymore, do we? We call, what do we call them?
Investigative.
Just investigative conferences.
Investigative conference. But if you want to participate in those, if you call the commissioner and say, I'm coming in on, Thursday early, and is there any chance there would be one of these conferences being scheduled that you would like to participate in? You don't say anything, do anything, you just sit, but you can actually hear the ongoing interaction with the investigators and the appraiser, and the appraiser might have an attorney there, but it's a pretty good process for you all to participate in, just so you get a firsthand experience of what the conference looks like and acts like.
And then you would have to recuse yourself if that ever progressed into something that the board heard. Wouldn't you?
I don't think so.
Unless you participate.
If you don't participate.
If you heard,
Yeah, I'm thinking if you heard it, right? I mean,
I
If
probably
you-
would anyway.
because you're already getting your opinions swayed one way or the other. Right?
I
Well,
thought that's what we were vetting at the committee level one time, was the fact that, did we want to promote that to the board members, because there was that.
There were those, and there's some residual language in the statute that actually those conferences used to be conducted by board members. Okay, and so there's a specific
It's like left
statutory
So there's
allowance
behind
that
language.
says you don't have to recuse yourself if you involve, although all board members did.
Okay.
As a matter of course, if you were involved in negotiating that, they'd recuse themselves. When I sat on the board, that was absolutely the practice.
Okay.
Mark?
Oh, I was just going to say to everyone that as you've heard all this getting laid out, and you heard at the onset, and I'm surprised there wasn't a question mentioned on that, it says, well, the enforcement committee was never really established until 2011. And it's kind of interesting. I've been here since '94, and I've been attending these whether I was a board member or if I was just sitting out in the audience. And for a young, small agency, it just shows the dramatic shift. When I first came here, all the discussion, all the consumption of time by committees was education. It was getting people licensed and certified. Joe probably remembers that. I mean, used to sit there, and that was all the board meeting was consumed with. There wasn't anything else, not all the topics that we're discussing like today. As we have moved through that process to get everyone educated, there's still a lot of elements of the education that's being handed down by the Appraisal Foundation as well as by the profession itself, that the committee still is important and viable to operate. But on the flip side, until that time, around 2011, which, it's kind of like, well, when did the recession really start? When did the complaints really start? They started before that, but being a small agency with small resources, board members were actually trying to resolve those complaints. But that mushroomed out to such a level that we had to get budget and funding from the legislature to hire investigative staff. They first started at a part-time level. Board members were still involved with it. But yet, when the ASC came through and then public started asking questions, that's when we said, golly, just like in education, we need to form a committee and let the committee do the heavy lifting with the staff to implement these strategies, these policies, these ideas, so that the board, when the board meets, can run more efficiently, because we've already had eyes and ears on these matters and have had people seek a recommendation on the resolution. So that's and that's really basically the function of any and all of these committees. And I'm sure that Laurie's going to go into the AMC Advisory Committee. It's a young committee, and I'm sure that plate is very loaded with a lot of items and issues. So it's just the sign of the times where an agency is in its point of maturity, because we are a licensing and regulatory agency, and regulation also requires enforcement. So.
As you can tell, there's been a ton of work that's occurred at this committee. I would venture a guess that that committee has probably logged more man hours in its volunteer time than the combination of all of the other committees together in any given year. And that also means it's logged a huge number of man hours from our staff. It's required pure, absolute hard work, creative thinking, open minds, and we've made, and you've heard descriptions of lots and lots of progress. So I think I'm thankful for those people that have served in the past. As committee assignments come up in the future, I don't expect it to be quite the man-eater it has been in the past, so don't run from that committee when given the opportunity to serve. Any other comments on enforcement? You want to move to AMC?
Sure, and thank you, Mr. McAnally, for putting me up there, because the AMC committee is the newest committee to this board. And I thought it was important for especially the non-appraiser members to understand what an AMC is. Appraisal Management Company, in essence, I hope I'm not going to go too far back in history, but it really started with a case in New York between WAMU that the Attorney General of New York, Andrew Cuomo, brought up against WAMU, and they cited, I guess, that would be the term, that clients, lenders were hand-picking appraisers to get the numbers, to get the job done. And so New York won that case, and from there came HVCC, which is the Home Valuation Code of Conduct, and that was brought about as a set of rules for lenders and appraisers, and that was established in 09-ish. Didn't live very long, because it was meant to protect the appraiser independence, but then HVCC was retired when Dodd-Frank which I had to look this up, Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. So we call it Dodd-Frank. It was passed by federal regulation, I believe, in 11? 10, thank you. And at that point, because it was federal regulation, like Mr. McAnally said, it put the state in a position to have our own legislation written for it. So in September of 11, Texas, correct me if I get any of these dates wrong, Texas passed legislation for Dodd-Frank to start implementing its regulation into the state of Texas. And a scope was written between like September of 11 and January of 12, which was when this AMC committee was formed. So since 12, that scope has been vetted at the committee level to try to start forming or clarifying, I guess, rules, because most of the rules were written, right?
Rules were written.
In 2011, after
which would have been the scope.
Effective date of the statute, the Texas law.
So the committee is clarifying some of the rules. They in the beginning were having to track the registration numbers of the AMCs. I don't know how you did it, but you targeted 180 and we hit it.
It's really
so
good.
That was real good.
Read those tea leaves.
So in the beginning, they were tracking those registrations, and I believe that was a large part of monitoring it to make sure that those numbers that were projected really were going to be hit. Currently, like I said, we're moving because that was such a great job at determining that number, and that number has not only been hit, but pretty much maintained, even after now a cycle of renewal. The committee now is working on, again, vetting the scope and some of the rules, and taking that scope after vetting it and seeing how it's going to be implemented and then enforced through the agency. And there's three main things that the committee is working on right now in my chair position, which is we have just recently undergone vetting audits really well and long.
Audits of whom?
The audits, it is federal regulation that an AMC is audited. Now, we need to decide as Texas what that was going to look like.
Oh, we haven't done it yet. We're
You're
just talking
writing
about.
that.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And anyway, that was the last committee meeting.
Yeah.
We talked about that a lot. Now, staff has a lot of requests from us to help us start to write those rules and how we're going to implement that and then enforce it. The other thing on the radar is review. Review is also a federal regulation that we have to do. In the first scope of work, there was some definition given to that, and that is going to be vetted to decide if that's still what Texas wants to do. And then the other thing is CNR, customary and reasonable fees, which for some reason in the Texas statute, it's the reverse. It says reasonable and customary fees, right?
Yes.
So, which I'm trying to get my head around that one. Is that going to be a statute change?
No.
1104 won't be open this session.
Okay.
Hopefully.
When it is open, is that something that we're going to
2017.
change? I mean, I just thought it was weird that the country was calling it one thing and Texas, of course, we're different.
Yeah,
we're
a whole other
different.
country.
Maybe everyone else is wrong.
That,
I think they need to be reasonable first
and then customary.
I've never noticed that. Funny.
Well, I kept saying it the other way around, and Mr. Olmixon went, well, Texas says it a little different. I was like, ooh. Okay. I wanted to read something because this was right off of, it explains it. And the reason that I wanted to give y'all a little bit more education or clarity about customary and reasonable fees is because it's a real high topic right now out in the AMC industry. There's a lawsuit that happened in Louisiana over it, correct? So anyway, appraisers are being compensated the point is for appraisers to be compensated at customary and reasonable rate based on the geographic market the property is located in. That's per Dodd-Frank, it's their rule. The reason is to ensure that AMCs and lenders use appraisers based on competency and not the lowest fee. Lowest fee appraisers would risk the collateral of the mortgages, therefore jeopardizing the well-being of the public and the lending process. So Dodd-Frank, the interim rule required customary and reasonable fees. Loosely defined, it should be a sampling of this customary and reasonable fee should be a sampling of appraisal fees in the area, and it's suggested that it can come from a state survey, which is in our materials for tomorrow. I believe Mr. Olmixon will be presenting that, or from somebody like Mercury Network Survey. They performed one, and from the state's real estate research groups. And help me here, Mr. Olmixon, cannot the AMC itself provide stats as long as they combine it with another survey?
No, they can do their own independent survey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's not a requirement. There's a couple of presumptions under federal law, but there's what data you can use, but they can do their own survey, yes.
Without any other input? I thought it was.
Well, what they can't do, they can't just say, let's look at what we've paid for the past year and say, okay, that's customary and reasonable because that's what we paid. Okay, that's
what I was
a
getting at.
tautological argument.
Okay. So bidding appraisals based on the lowest fees typically excludes the most competent appraisers. Anyway, this is a discussion that's happening in the industry, and I believe it's going to be probably a pretty hot topic next year, but it's something that the committee is currently, it's on our agenda to get to next year. I just printed off this, I don't know how many of the appraisal members in here have ever been on appraisal port, but they do a poll every week. And it just happened to be this week, what percentage of your clients offers what you would consider, this is talking to the appraiser, what you would consider to be customary and reasonable fees for most assignments. The appraisers out there, per this survey, feel like only about 27% of them feel like 60% of their clients are giving them a customary and reasonable fee. 20% feel like only 40 to 50% of them are. So I think that's right in line with why this is such a high topic in the industry right now. So anyway, that's the committee report.
Is it going to be, okay, so you have to define what the audit process is. Is the committee going to define what is a legitimate audit of an AMC? Is that your charge?
That is our charge, and staff is doing a great job of helping us sort of kind of what I would call a matrix. It's not really a matrix. It's like the levels, again, of what an audit would have. So we're trying to say, since we have to, by federal regulation, audit the AMCs, what is that going to look like? Right now, staff is working on that document.
And the person doing the audit, is that us, or is that some third party? That is us doing that audit. Send me, and then so do you say to an AMC, okay, I want to see, did you match the complex assignment up with the experienced appraiser, or did you match it up with the lowest bidder? I mean, is that a part of the audit process?
That is one of the topics we are considering. Exactly. And there's a bunch of different things that we're considering. Come and sit in on an AMC meeting. Because there's a lot. In fact, our last committee meeting, we had a list. And we just tried to narrow it down to what we thought would be the most prevalent. That would do a broad audit. I will tell you that I think one of the great things that's progressing through is we realized that we wanted to stage this out. We didn't want to come in and break into AMC and say, show me all your guns. We want to say, the first level's going, are you doing these things? Who's your principal? Just some of the things that we've picked out. And then if there ever is a complaint, or if there's ever any reason to dig into their business audit-wise, then there will be another level of audit at that point. Or if they fail the first audit.
Yeah, if the appraiser, does the appraiser then file a complaint against the AMC with the state board to say, wow, they're only paying me $200 or something? I mean, is there something like that could, the AMCs are going like, you know what I mean? And you're not on my list anymore. But it would seem like if you're doing this fair and reasonable thing, you're almost being the big granddaddy going in there and saying, your fees will be this, or you're not in compliance with fair and reasonable, or reasonable in whatever the term is there, that we're almost taking on a role of being I don't know where you stop. where does a regulatory agency stop in the process of setting the fees even?
It's funny that you ask that, because for this work, you have had to remind me over and over again, because I keep thinking of it on the appraiser side, but only one committee at a time can handle one topic. So since it says federal regulation that's coming down on AMCs, the AMC committee will handle it. But I see it coming in on the appraisal side, which might be something that appraisers start issuing complaints against AMCs on. So I've been trying to put it on both agendas, and she keeps on putting it.
Well, in your materials for discussion tomorrow are the proposed amendments to Chapter 159 of the board's rules, which are those rules that are applicable to AMCs. And you might want to peruse those rules this evening before you come to the board meeting tomorrow. But one of those rules includes a laundry list of prohibited practices that AMCs may not engage in. And the customary and reasonable fee is, or payment of the customary and reasonable fee is also addressed in those rules. And an AMC must have a dispute resolution policy in place so that if an appraiser who conducts an assignment for the AMC has an issue with either the fee or some other question at the AMC, they have to engage in that dispute resolution practice. So basically they have to work it out, or try to work it out with the AMC first before they can then come to the board and file a complaint.
Yeah, that is very clear.
And that's, you may have mentioned this, and I missed it. What's the makeup of your committee? Are there AMC members and board members?
Thank you. Very good question. Actually, there's only one board member. And by statute right now, the board member is the vice chair of the board. So whoever's sitting in the vice chair position of the board is then the chair of AMC. And then there's also two public members currently
one agency rep, AMC rep, and one public member.
What was the word?
Industry representative.
Controlling
person. One industry representative who is a controlling member of, or is the controlling person of an AMC.
Of an AMC, and then just a public member. And this particular committee happens to have an attorney as a public member.
So it's Ms. Fontana, Ms. Oates, and
Mr.
McNamara.
Who did you say the last one? McNamara?
McNamara.
Lawrence McNamara. He's an attorney out of the Dallas area.
And they have term of 2 years.
So you've got your boat loaded. I mean, you've got new frontiers to
Do they meet here typically, or do they meet conference call?
Again, by statute, the AMC currently has to meet in person.
By
right?
rule.
By rule, sorry. If I'm using
The-
the wrong legal terms.
No, that's okay. When the rules were adopted, the board chose as a policy decision to have the AMC committee subject to the Open Meetings Act. And that is one of the proposed amendments in the rules up for consideration tomorrow, is to remove that restriction so that that committee could also meet telephonically like all of the other board committees.
And also to change the makeup of the committee,
That's
correct?
statutory.
That's statutory.
Yes, that's statutory.
We are also looking at changing, because of what you said, that's a lot, the makeup of that committee by statute. And the suggestion now is still one board member?
To add 2 additional members, another controlling person, and another public member.
Which would make it 5 total on the committee.
Since there's a lot of work, we need more hands.
Yeah, and that audit process is going to be incredible.
The AMC regulations apply to residential AMCs, right? Y'all don't regulate any of the commercial ones, pure commercial.
Right.
They're all.
That's
yeah,
what
by
Dodd-Frank was strictly residential. Although that's the vast majority of the appraisal work by volume. But it is, for the public members, it's the residential AMCs.
And not every residential appraisal is performed under the management of an AMC either. So the AMC only has a segment of the actual residential work that's happening in the state of Texas.
It's significant.
Significant.
Yeah, the estimate is it's approaching 80%.
But if anybody wants to open a pure commercial AMC, they can do it and not have to visit y'all.
Not yet.
Texas still, according to the Appraisal Institute, has probably the strongest AMC statute in the country.
Good to know.
Questions on AMC? Additional comments? Hearing none, let's move to the discussion and possible legislative changes for 2015 and identification of key legislative members and committee chairs.
So their materials, handout, there's a memo from the board to the Foundation Appraiser Coalition. And it has attached to it.
Sorry, I was trying to see if there was a.
And it has attached to it an explanation of the proposed changes to Chapter 1103 of the Occupations Code. That's our Appraiser Enabling Act. And so I'm just going to hit the highlights, unless and then if anyone has any questions, we can delve a little deeper if necessary. So. The first thing is, this truly is a housekeeping bill, in the sense, some people call it housekeeping, some people call it cleanup, but in essence, we start with the clarification of terminology. So, especially as practices change and we look at the statute and see that the terminology limits or no longer accurately reflects what the board is doing or the terminology that's using. So there's a lot of, there are several definitions are clarified or expanded. That's the first part. And so for example, appraisal review is a defined term in Chapter 1104, but not in 1103. And so we're adding so that it reflects both. There are, on the detail, the attached list. Those are kind of in order. It just goes down the various provisions that are proposed to be amended and offers an explanation, and occasionally in the italicized language is some further explanation or justification for each of those items. But I'm going to stick to the front page only and just talk about those major items unless you have questions on others. So currently the statute provides that the board can establish, well, the standards under which appraisal work is done is the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, and that's adopted by the statute and by the rule in Texas. The statute also authorizes the board to adopt by rule standards that are at least as strict as. Okay, so roughly equivalent to. That is, that language is potentially a trap for us, only, or for the board in making policy, because the only time you would actually adopt standards or potentially adopt standards that are not the uniform standards is when the uniform standards are not required, and you may adopt for those circumstances where it's not required. There may be alternative standards. For example, there are international evaluation standards today that are accepted in many nations. But whether or not they would meet that really narrow definition of at least as strict as USPAP is problematic. And so we're asking or suggesting that that language be changed to allow the board by rule to adopt international and alternative standards which are recognized if the board determines that they would provide adequate consumer protection for Texans. So it just gives the board a little more flexibility with that, rather than that one specific phrase, which could be too restrictive, if you will. So it doesn't. This doesn't open up the door. It's not wide open. The board still has to adopt rules, and in any situation in which they would do that, they'd have to be convinced, one, that USPAP doesn't apply, and that the standards that we would recognize provide adequate consumer protection. So that would be on a case-by-case or a category-by-category basis for the adoption of a rule. There's a provision there which we've talked about briefly that would allow board members and key staff to make regular presentations to groups of license holders and award appraiser continuing education for those credits for those presentations. That's it would need to be in the statute in order for that to happen. Even today, the Appraiser Qualification Board allows the board to award ACE credit to appraisers who attend a board meeting. However, we're not able to do that because we don't have the authority under the statute. So while AQB allows it, we couldn't even adopt a rule until we changed the statute. So this provision would also allow that. And there's a limitation on the number, and all of that is certainly, it's at the discretion of the board who would adopt a rule about that. All of these, none of these are really kind of self-actuating. They give authorization to the board, and then the board would determine by rule how to implement. Currently, board members are appointed for 2-year terms, similar to many advisory boards. And that's because this board began its life as an advisory committee. And when Chapter 1103 was amended to establish the board, those terms weren't changed. And so there's a recommendation here to extend the terms to be much more similar to other policy-making boards, and adopt some of the other characteristics of policy-making boards, like, for example, definitions about, the executive committee is already defined in the statute, but other quasi-judicial immunity is also granted in the statute. However, there's not a requirement in the statute, as there are in many other enabling statutes, for the kind of training, which we already do, but it's not required in the statute. So, and I don't know how much of that was done prior to 5 years ago as well. But we essentially took many of the provisions from 1101 that have to do with the commission, and then transplanted them, reflected them in 1103, and then there were a few things in 1103 that didn't appear, like quasi-judicial immunity doesn't appear in in 1101. So that's also another cleanup bill that's going to go forward this session if if the Association of Realtors carries that. And then also we had talked about the advisory committee being expanded from 3 members to 5 to more effectively handle the workload anticipated as those federal rules are rolled out by the CFPB and the other agencies. One of those, the major requirements that AQB has been threatening for a while is fingerprint-based background checks. So the criminal history checks, and that is it had been announced in 2013, I believe, or 2012, that in fact by 2015 that would be a requirement. However, the proposed interpretations surrounding that requirement were proposed by AQB in what they call exposure drafts. It's kind of a similar process to proposing a rule, taking comments, making changes, reproposing the rule, taking comments, making changes, and then finally adopting the rule or publishing the rule and then setting an effective date. This has been a long one because of the various places where states are and the incredibly detailed requirement that was initially proposed. And there's been quite a bit of back and forth with AQB and the states and the regulatory organizations, back and forth about that. So much so that right now, last April, the requirement was postponed from January 1 of 2015 to January 1 of 2017 to give them plenty of time to work out the details. They're still working out the details, okay? It is not yet finalized what those requirements are going to be. But we know that in order to implement them, we need the authority. And so this statute simply says, give us the authority to require fingerprint-based criminal history checks, and then once the AQB rules are final, then this body, by rule, so in statute, it says that the board may, by rule, establish this, implement this requirement. And if we do, then these other things must be done. That's the way it reads in the proposed language of the statute. And so, once we know what the final rules are, then this board can determine when and exactly how and to what detail and costs and all those kinds of things. Okay?
Can I make a comment real quick? Because one of the things that I think has been a great learning curve for me as being a appraiser member is your direction in that, because you tend to want to go, oh, we need to write a rule about that, or you start thinking about it. I think one of the things that you and Kristen especially have done well, all the staff, is you've been on top of it, and Texas is like you said, leading, with the things that we do have, but we don't want to move too fast because then we would be either in this hold pattern that you even admitted that the AQB's in, or we could, be on hold too long and not make any movement. So anyway, as a committee participant, there's great leadership there to have that.
To anticipate something you won't have the authority to do because you won't be in session until 2017.
And if you're not a lawmaker, if you're not doing this as a daily job, you don't understand how that process goes. So.
Well, thank you. I really do believe that's a principal part of my job is keeping track and really forward thinking on the strategic part of it, so that we are prepared. We're never behind the 8th ball. We have the flexibility and the time to really think through the policies that we want to put in place and make sure that we have the authority to do it. Thank you. There's also, there are many licensing agencies in Texas have confidentiality provisions with respect to their investigative work that's done in investigating complaints. We do not.
Join us up here, Jesse, so you'll be on the video, please. We'll just. Let the record
That's about for you.
We've been joined by Mr. Barba, whose plane finally arrived. Thank you, sir.
I was trying to take my time, but you guys are still here.
We were saving all the good stuff for you, Jesse.
So we do not currently have the ability to, absent a case-by-case, document-by-document exceptions process in making a claim to the Attorney General for a ruling that this particular document is attorney-client work privilege and therefore shouldn't be subject to PIA. We essentially, everything that we have is subject to disclosure under PIA, Public Information Act. And so, Kristen and Tony and staff spent some time looking at other agencies' confidentiality provisions, and we've worked up one that we believe would serve the interests of the board and keep us from. And the principal reason for that is not lack of transparency at all, because when the order is finalized, that document stands on its own, and so that can be used for whatever purpose it needs to be used for. But the process that we undertook and the many drafts and the negotiations back and forth and all of that kind of stuff can't be misappropriated to be used potentially in civil litigation to advantage one party over the other. And that's really what we're, so it's an abuse of resources or protection of resources from abuse is the principal driver behind that recommendation that we have that. And it's been recognized by the legislature that that's appropriate for licensing agencies to have. And then the last item on here has to do with the continuing education. So we have a very slim provision in the current statute that allows us to specify continuing education requirements for appraisers. Okay? It does not. It would be a real stretch to interpret that to mean that we have the authority to say approve this course or not that course, or recognize this instructor as acceptable for this course and not that course. Those kinds of things. In the education arena, it hasn't been deemed necessary, or at least when we started out, because the AQB has a course approval program for national standards for national providers. And so many of them do that. The Appraisal Institute, gets their course approved by the, and then they offer it in all 50 states, and there's 100,000 appraisers that are potential clients. So it's worth the cost, the time and energy of doing that. But if a state, like Texas, and we have been approached by one of our trade associations, professional association, they want to have some continuing education courses offered to Texas appraisers that they develop. We simply don't have the authority to do that. And so we've asked in the statute for a broader authority to approve providers, courses, and instructors, both for qualifying education and for continuing education. So again, that's not self-implementing. The boards will still have to and have the opportunity to craft the rules and determine what should be automatically approved and what criteria we should use to grade or evaluate classes for approval, or instructors for approval, or providers for approval. And that really is at your pace at the board's pace, but we have to gain the authority first. Okay. Those are the really big items. There are, I guess there's one other large one that is a topic of conversation. I suspect will be a topic of some potential debate at the legislature, and that is today we have two different standards for whether or not an appraiser who is reviewing another appraiser's work, and that work was done for a property in Texas, so let's just say it's appraisal report on a property in Texas. Under 1103, under the appraisal statute, it is not required that that appraiser hold a credential in Texas, merely to review and opine about the quality of the other appraiser's work. Okay? Now, if they go so far as to render an opinion of value, then of course they do have to be credentialed here. That's the current standard under 1103, but it took analyzing several different components of the statute to reach that conclusion. So we're actually asking that that conclusion be included clearly in the statute. Now, under 104, the AMC statute, there is a specific requirement for a certain number of reviews to be done for purposes of compliance by the AMC must have a certain amount of the reports that they have ordered during the past year reviewed for USPAP compliance, and that reviewer must be credentialed in Texas under the statute. Okay? And so that we defer, if you will, the argument of whether that's appropriate or inappropriate. That was passed by the legislature. Before, it was negotiated between the parties in interest, the stakeholders, and so it may remain that we over time maintain two different standards, but we just wanted to clarify in 1103 what we believe is already there. And let's see here. Oh, we also wanted to set a much cleaner standard for a statute of limitations. Right now, we have a discovery-based statute of limitations instead of an event-based statute of limitations. So, what that means is that a report that was completed 8 years ago, if we receive a complaint on that today, then we have to evaluate when that flaw became known, was discovered, or should have been discovered. Okay? That's a very complex evaluation, rather than what we'd like to do is clean that up and just say, okay, this is the report, the date of value is this date, okay? You got 4 years. Okay? If you don't find anything wrong within 4 years, it doesn't mean there's not civil liability from a lender to an appraiser or whatever. There still could do that, but don't bring it to us and expect us to investigate it and discipline somebody for something that happened more than 4 years ago, especially in light of the fact that they're only required to keep your records for 5 years.
I was just sitting thinking, it's gotta love it when you have that kind of an open window and you might not have the record.
And we have that.
You're still obligated to respond, right?
We have that frequently, where the allegations are about a report that was done so long ago that nobody has the records, and yet we still have to go through the process and then finally go, you know what, we don't have documents to prove anything, so we have to dismiss it. And we wasted a whole bunch of resources and put appraisers through a whole bunch of vexing questioning, perhaps, that without basis. We also do address the issue, which is we clarify that that unfounded allegations, we're using that allegations language of misconduct by appraisers do not constitute a formal complaint. So we put that language right into the statute that supports our kind of two-phase approach to handling allegations versus formal complaint. And, well, if you have any questions about anything else, I'm happy to explain it or address it.
You've done a good job. I believe we've covered some pieces of those throughout the day today. We do have a couple of fact representatives here. We do want to express our appreciation for the work that you all are doing on our behalf. And, I guess offer the opportunity if there's anything that you think we've missed in terms of trying to get the board up to speed.
Not offhand. That was a very, very good bullet point summary.
I say thank you for this more than anything. This is something that we can share with our members that doesn't, a 39-page rewrite of a document that goes right here. This highlights it. You don't know how important this is to our membership to see something that just kind of bullet points items so that they can create dialogue. So thank you back to you too, because it kind of worked both ways. So we're very appreciative of this document.
It's already been used once at a presentation to the Houston.
Yeah, it was used
Institute.
yesterday in Houston. And they raised money for our fact pack
I'm sorry?
because of it too.
I emailed that to you guys.
Fundraiser.
Yes.
Didn't you email this to
Yes.
us? Okay.
I did.
Eric,
Good job, staff. That's exactly what we want, to open the dialogue. So that
Eric Woomer, I'm sure will also be using that to brief legislators as opposed to 39 pages, which they won't read.
That was the challenge, is to do a one-pager.
Well,
all you get.
I didn't
One
notice
page.
that.
Please don't make the font any smaller.
You could have put it on the backside.
No, one page. That's all you get.
Any other questions about the legislative changes? We do have the Texas Public Investment Act training, and I sense a lot of people kind of bouncing around in their chairs. So I'd like to offer the opportunity for about a 5-minute break, and I really mean 5 minutes because I'd like to get us in and on to the Investment Act training. I do think there's snacks somewhere, so I offer.
There's an incentive to get back.
They'll be in here.
The staff has indicated that there are snacks, so you've got 5 minutes, and we're going to start back in 5 minutes.
Are we back in?
Are we back in session?
Are we
Well,
back
go
in?
ahead.
No, go ahead, I'm teasing.
No, Eric Woomer, our
Yes.
consultant who was here earlier, said the bill is over at Legislative Council. So it's taken the first step other than, formulating it.
So the sooner we get in to the hopper in line, the better.
And who submitted it?
Temple.
Temple did. Great.
Representative Temple.
On the House side, he's in essence agreed to
He's the one that did
carry
for
it.
us last
The other
time,
one is
too.
still waiting to hear.
Okay, that's what I was going to say. Is it going to go on the Senate side too? We're going to run it both houses?
Yeah, but he hasn't heard finally from the prospect on
Mm-hmm.
that one, so he
Do we know, can we know who the prospect is?
suggested that.
Okay.
No.
Just in case.
You wasn't going to lobby him, were you?
All right.
Oh, maybe soon.
Okay.
He just hadn't heard finally.
Good. All right, now we can do the exciting.
In your materials are
You want me to-
handouts. Just hang on just a second. And the video, will cover the material in the handouts. So, yes, that's the handouts. So, Tony, you want to start up the video, and then Ms. Huerta will be in at the conclusion of the video to answer any questions.
How long is this video?
She
Jesse,
is our
you're responsible
investment
for all the
officer.
questions.
24 minutes.
20.
It's not quite that long, actually.
Well, it's advertised at 20.
It is,
20-minute now.
right.
Which is precisely when I'll be back.
Training requirement of the Public Funds Investment Act for members of governing boards of state agencies and institutions of higher education. Public Funds Investment Act was first approved by the legislature in Texas in 1987, and it has been amended by the legislature in every session since 1987. In 1995, substantial parts of the act were rewritten in response to investment problems which occurred in Texas and elsewhere, particularly in Orange County, California. Thankfully, none of the problems which occurred prior to 1995 have reoccurred in Texas since that time. But members of governing boards need to remember that investment problems can occur at any time. Before this program began, I was talking to my colleague, and he was telling me about a problem which occurred outside of Texas. Carlin?
That's exactly correct. As recent as September 1997, several school districts in Pennsylvania lost more than $71 million in fraudulent investments. And that goes to show that even though Orange County, California lost money in 1995 or 1994, and other prominent financial institutions or local government institutions lost money, we still continue to have losses in 1997. So governing boards have to be vigilant and know that they're ultimately responsible, even though they have treasurers, investment officers, whatever the case may be, they have chief financial officers, they're still ultimately responsible. In fact, when we take a moment and listen to what a panel of experts has to say regarding the responsibility of governing boards as outlined by the Public Funds Investment Act.
I'd like to thank you all today for joining me in discussing the responsibilities of governing boards as regulated by the Public Funds Investment Act of Texas. Jeff, I'd like to start with you. What are these responsibilities?
Well, the Act provides many responsibilities for board members under the Public Funds Investment Act. Most of the initial ones that are provided include adopting an investment policy and an investment strategy, approving the investment officer, approving an independent source of training for the investment officer, and at least annually reviewing the investment policy and the investment strategy of the agency.
Brian?
In addition, the board is going to want to determine whether or not there's any material conflict of interest between the investing officer and the broker-dealer. One other point would be that the governing board is going to want to approve the qualified brokers if they do not have a investment committee.
Yes, the governing body should receive and review three things: quarterly reports from the investment officer, an annual audit to confirm compliance with the Act, and an auditor's report that has reviewed the quarterly reports from the investment officer. This last item was added to the Act in 1997.
So to summarize, governing boards have four key responsibilities: to designate an investment officer or officers and to ensure compliance with ethical standards of the law; two, to approve an overall investment policy and strategy for each fund group; three, to ensure the investment officer complies with the training requirements of the law; and four, to review the quarterly investment reports prepared by the investment officer. You mentioned that the duties of the board is to designate an investment officer. Why would they want to have more than one?
Well, the law does require that they designate at least one person as an investment officer. Obviously, people travel, people go on vacation, people become ill, and you do not want to hamstring the agency by not having someone authorized to act when investment decisions, fund transfers, and the like need to take place. So it is a good idea to have more than one investment officer. Now, as a safeguard, the law does also require that each investment officer sign the quarterly investment report that's presented to the governing body of the board.
What kind of training is required for this by this investment officer?
Well, the law requires that within 6 months of being named an investment officer, that individual must take a training course. In the 1997 amendments to the Act, the Higher Education Coordinating Board was designated as the agency to train not only investment officers of state agencies, but governing body members, board members of the agencies as well. Now, in addition, the law further requires that within a 2-year period, that investment officer must have an additional training session. That training can be provided either by the coordinating board or by an independent source that is approved by the governing body of the agency.
Okay, regarding the governing board members, what kind of training is required by them?
Again, the law specifies that within 6 months of being named as a board member, that person must have training under the Investment Act. that training is satisfied by this video, for example. Again, the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board is the agency designated to provide training to governing body members.
Harlan, we just heard a discussion about the governing board's responsibilities for designating investment officers. You and I have both been investment officers for public entities in Texas. I like to think of the investment officer as the guardian of the organization's financial assets.
Yeah, so do I. They're also responsible for preparing the investment policy and submitting it to the governing body for review and approval. And actually, they're going to submit it to them annually for their approval. When we listen to our panel of experts discuss the requirements of investment policy as outlined by the Public Funds Investment Act.
We've discussed the responsibilities of governing board members to designate one or more investment officers. We've also discussed the need for training for those officers as well as the governing board members. I'd like to turn now to the investment policy. Brian, could you tell us the purpose of having an investment policy and why is it important?
Sure. An investment policy is an important document because it provides an instrument to the board by which it can clearly state what objectives it intends to carry out through its investments. In addition to the objectives, it's going to want to stipulate what type of risk the board is willing to undertake with its investments. Finally, through that policy portion, the board is going to state what authorized investments it will allow in conjunction with the Public Funds Investment Act. Finally, the board will stipulate a strategy, and that strategy can delineate things such as investment mix, portfolio yield, maturity, those types of things. Most of all, I think it's important that the board have a clearly defined and very easy to understand policy.
Jeff, could you tell me what the legal requirements of the investment policy are?
Don't forget, in 1995, the legislature amended this law in the environment of the Orange County situation. And in that regard, many changes were made to the law that affected the investment policy, most important of which are the following. The policy be in writing, for one thing, that the emphasis of the policy be on safety of principal and liquidity rather than yield. Yield is to be addressed, as Brian stated, in the policy, but it is not the primary emphasis. Matter of fact, it is at the bottom of the list of the items that are to be addressed in making investment decisions. Diversification of the portfolio is important. The maturity of the investments are required to be stated in the policy. The quality and capability of the management of the public funds is to be addressed in the policy as well. In 1997, two new changes were added to that requirement of what be in an investment policy. One was to include methods to monitor the market prices of the securities in which the funds are invested. In addition, for purposes of settlement on the acquisition of securities, a settlement is to be done on a delivery versus payment basis, except for those funds that are invested in an investment pool, such as tax pool, or in a mutual fund.
Okay, Brady, the law also requires the adoption of investment strategies for each fund group as part of the investment policy. Could you please tell me what do we mean by investment strategies and what do we mean by investment fund groups?
Fund groups are usually designated by purpose, and for governmental entities, those purposes can be linked to cash flow requirements such as debt service payments on bonds outstanding. So the strategy for investing in a particular fund group is executed to ensure that the liabilities are paid with lower probability of loss on those investments that are maturing. Strategy should also provide governing boards some form of benchmark with which to compare returns.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, how often should the board review these policies and strategies?
The law requires that at least annually the policies and strategies are to be reviewed by the board. In that regard, they could review the investments that are authorized, whether a different strategy should be used for operating funds or debt service funds. The whole gambit is up for review. The 1997 amendments to the law took that one step further. Now the governing body must adopt a formal resolution stating that they have reviewed the investment policy and strategy And if changes have been made, that those changes are recorded in the resolution that is adopted by the board.
So to summarize, the investment policy defines the overall objectives of the investment program, sets limits on the amount and types of risk that the governing board is willing to undertake, and identifies the authorized investments that can be used in the agency's portfolio.
You just heard that your investment policy should include a list of authorized investments. Where the Public Funds Investment Act also identified 4 specific investments that are prohibited to be included in your investment policy. You may want to include a listing of items that should not be invested by your agency.
That's right, Harlan. And in addition to those that are specifically unauthorized in the Public Funds Investment Act, you may also not want to include the entire range of investments that are allowed under the law as a matter of policy, because they may not be appropriate to your organization's investment strategy. And now let's listen to our panel discuss the requirements of the investment reports.
Up to this point, we've discussed the responsibilities of governing board members to provide for designation of investment officer or officers, the training required by those officers and the governing board members as well. We've also discussed the importance of investment policies and the strategies that need to be included as part of the investment policies. The final area I'd like to talk about is the reporting of requirements of the investment program. Brady, would you tell us what information needs to be included in these quarterly reports?
The report should begin with a summary statement prepared and signed by the investment officers, stating that it complies with 3 things: generally accepted accounting principles, the strategies contained in the policy, and the relevant provisions of the Public Funds Investment Act. As to the rest of the report, a schedule should be shown both for the beginning and end of the quarter, and for each individual investment, 4 things: book value or cost, market value, accrued interest, and the maturity date.
Brian, what should governing board members look for in these reports?
As a board member reviewing the report, the first thing that you want to be able to do is readily understand what is presented. The report must be simple and clear. The descriptors of the investments must be understandable, so that if a board member has a question, they can specifically point to a line item and ask the investment officer about that particular issue. Board members should also look for benchmarking information on the face of that report, so that they can compare the quarterly results of the investments with some benchmark to have a basis for understanding whether or not the report presents information that they feel comfortable approving.
And Jeff, what action does the board need to take when receiving the quarterly report?
Well, the board under the law has no duty to take any formal action. The board has only the responsibility of receiving a report at least once a quarter. They can receive reports more often than quarterly if they choose to request reports more often. But as Brian said, it's important that if the report is doing its job correctly, it will be easy to understand. If there's something in the report that a board member does not understand, by all means, ask the investment officer questions about that. Ask about judging against the benchmarks that are in the report. It's important to keep in mind that your responsibility as a board member rests with the administration of public funds. You may appoint an investment officer, but the ultimate responsibility rests with you as a board member. Ask questions if you don't understand the answers. Ask again.
So to summarize the investment reporting section of the investment program, investment reports need to be prepared and signed by the investment officer, describe in detail the investment position as of the date of the report, contain a summary statement prepared in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles or GAAP, stating the beginning market value for the period, any changes to the market value for that period, the ending market value for the period, as well as fully accrued interest for the period, the book value and market value for each separately invested asset at beginning and end of period by type of asset and fund type invested, the maturity date of each separately invested asset, the fund or account for which each separately invested asset was acquired, and that the portfolio is in compliance with the investment strategy and the relevant provisions of the Public Funds Investment Act of Texas. I'd like to thank each of you gentlemen for joining me today and presenting the requirements of the Public Funds Investment Act to the governing boards.
You just heard that the Public Funds Investment Act requires quarterly reports to the governing body. However, I always prefer monthly reports. I think quarterly is much too long. In fact, you can lose millions of dollars in just a minute or two. Therefore, by providing monthly reports, the governing body is much more familiar with the activity of the investment portfolio. Can you think of any other red flags, Kareem?
Certainly. One of our panelists mentioned the importance of benchmarking in the portfolio. One of the items the governing boards may want to focus on is the return on the portfolio and how it compares to the benchmark. A return that far exceeds the benchmark could be an indication of too much risk in the portfolio, and the board might want to ask questions of the investment officer concerning that. If there isn't a benchmark, then perhaps looking at the return in comparison to some other type of comparable security, such as a treasury bill, may be appropriate. Another area that the board may want to look at is the weighted average maturity of the investment portfolio and the length of maturity of the individual investments. Investment maturities that are too long for the type of cash flow that the organization has could also indicate that problems might arise if it becomes necessary to sell the investment in advance of maturity. And finally, lack of diversification in the investment program is also a matter of concern. And that's also that means diversification in both the type of investment and the vendors that are involved in the investment program. Can you think of anything else?
Well, when you mentioned diversification, I was thinking about time frame as well as a third element. Whether it's not you want investments on a 1 year basis, 2 year, 3 or 5, or whatever the case may be, but you should be staggered in some configuration as opposed to all your eggs in one basket. In addition to what you said, I think undue expectation on investment officers is something that you should be aware of. Some organizations push for a great deal of interest income, and by doing so, the investment officer would always have to take some additional risk to obtain additional interest income. So that type of undue pressure and undue expectations can lead you down that wrong path.
Thank you, Harlan, and thank you for spending this time reviewing with us the requirements of the Public Funds Investment Act. If you have additional questions, please consult with your investment officer.
Guess in the middle of the table, what year was that made?
97, 98, somewhere around there.
I've seen that about 4 times. It's always exciting every time I see it.
Let's see, I think the winning date was 1999.
Oh, gosh.
19 what?
99.
99, okay.
Yes. So,
I didn't
what
see
happened
the
to
quarterly
Tony?
report in our
You weren't trained to be able to evaluate it yet, so you don't have it in your agenda. But now that you're trained, you
Yeah, I'm all trained up, huh?
Let's see here. The lights back.
Whoa.
I will say this though.
Now they're all
I was
interested. They're
reviewing
looking,
the
they've
staff
got a list
reports a
of
couple of days ago,
And
and I got to the budget, and I didn't look up
at
that it had last year's budget, and then you turn the page over for this year's budget, and I looked at that and I went, holy smokes, how did we burn all that much money up in 3 months?
It's an easy thing to do.
And just to remind you, the board may recall when it approved the budget at the August meeting,
that we established a couple of new reserve funds for education and facilities. And then we also have an existing reserve. And all of those reserves are invested through the investment policy that is included in your materials behind the video handout. The policy is reviewed and adopted by the board at the February meeting. So the policy will be up for review again in February of 2015. The investment policy is the very last page of the handout. And Ms. Huerta is here to answer any of your questions. She is our investment officer, and it is Ms. Huerta and her staff that prepares the budget reports that you see in your materials, as well as the investment reports for all of the reserve funds.
Right, we don't have any investments right now. We had to wait until everybody was trained before we could do any type of investments. And so what we do for the investments is the Texas Safekeeping Trust. That's who we have our monies held with. And right now they do repo. So they do the repurchase agreement. So they'll put the money in and they come out every day. So it's not an actual investment. And what they invest in is the U.S. Treasuries. And so they're the ones who have the investment officers that go out and they look for the best investments for the agency, and we let them know how much it is that we want to invest. So what we want to purchase. Do we want to purchase a $100,000 security, a $250,000 security? We let them know that amount, and then they go out and they do the purchase of it. And so once we do those purchases, then you'll start receiving, and actually the reports are done monthly. The ones that we do for the commission, they're done on a monthly basis, and they're put out there on our website so that you can look at them monthly, but you get them quarterly at the quarterly meeting.
How large is the reserve fund?
Right now we have I don't have it here for TLCB, for you. I don't have that budget. Oh, wait a minute, maybe
I believe it was $40,000 that we dedicated to the education fund. And I want to say
I don't remember how much we put for facilities.
Like
$100,000, $150,000 for the facilities fund.
And the other
approximately.
is a reserve to maintain our operation for 9 months, is that
correct?
Right? 9 months?
Yes,
Right.
correct.
And that amount, I've forgotten, is like 300,000 maybe?
It's 3 months worth of, it's
Oh,
3 to 4 months.
3 or 4 months.
Right,
Of operational
worth of operations.
expenses. Yes.
And I've forgotten.
So now that you've had the training, so then in the February meeting, when we have the February meeting for you guys, then I'll have a report for you then of the investments that we purchased.
I have a question. Have we always had this, one, and two, did this really, is it SDSI that created this?
The need for this.
The need for this?
Yes, because before, if we had our investments with the real estate trust account and the real estate inspection trust account, we had those investments and they were invested by the Treasury when we were under appropriation. So Treasury held all that money for us, they did all the investments. And so now we're under safekeeping trust, so it's a separate compartment of the Treasury. They're still under the Treasury Department, but it's called safekeeping trust. And so they have their own staff and their own people that go out and do the investments for the SDSI agencies.
But Walker, remember we didn't used to have a budget policy. That became when we adopted SDSI. That was one of my first meetings. I said, well, wait a minute, where's the timing? Shortly after that, we began asking for when the time comes, because you have to build the fund, and we weren't sure exactly, how good the commissioner has proven to be in terms of anticipating what the revenue flow would be. And so I think it's all been held, as I understand it, kind of in a bulk account until we got mature enough to be able to begin to develop the other investment strategies. So do we mirror track? In other words, is Texas Treasury Safekeeping Trust the only place they invest money?
Yes. Well, they invest money in the U.S. Treasuries, but it's the safekeeping trust who does the investment.
Who does the work for you?
Yes.
Okay. And so is their permissible investments parallel to ours?
Yes, exactly the same thing.
And the target goals, they really aren't stated in these, and sometimes in policies I see like targeted goals in terms of minimum standards and the maintenance of a minimum fund for 90 days operation or 180 or whatever, is that built into our budget policy?
It's in our budget
It's in our budget
policy.
policy, yes, to have the minimum of the, for operations.
Question here, it says that you maintain a laddered approach to the portfolio. What's the ladder?
The
I mean, how's
ladder
that-
will be, well, how we have for the accounts for the real estate trust and the real estate inspection is we have it laddered by, some are due in 6 months, some are due 9 months, you know.
That's what I'm talking about. How is the ladder?
Right
The
now.
maturity is
Yeah,
staggered.
The maturity, well, it's a ladder, that's what you call it.
Right, and
So-
what we try to do is we try to have funds coming due every 3 to 6 months.
Okay.
So, I mean, mature, investments mature this way, and then we just reinvest it. Once it comes
Right.
mature, if we see that we don't have any outstanding things that we're gonna be spending the monies on, then we reinvest it.
Right, but conceptually on the ladder, the ones that mature early, if you don't need the money, you put it at the top and then it goes out to a longer, like a 1-year maturity date
Right.
or something like that. And so that you're constantly
Every-
rolling it over.
Yes.
So is that what you're talking about
That's what
doing
we're talking
here?
about there for the
So in these kind of investments, they're very short term then, they're 3, 6, 9, 12 months?
Most of them are a year.
A year, okay.
Yeah, most of them are a year. We do have some that are 18 months. And so right now, some of the ones we have coming due are, say, February. But so because we've been purchasing them all along, we have a staggered, when they're coming due.
Okay.
Well, and those could vary over time, I would assume,
Mm-hmm.
because I would guess that's the reason you look at this investment strategy on an annual basis as a board, because you may choose to have some other theory. Normally, what I was accustomed to is somebody would come and give us a report, annually, quarterly, a forecasting report that might say, oh my gosh, you don't want a year-long investment, you might want a 90-day investment, or you might find situations where 2 years makes sense, but we don't. But today, we're operating on about a 12-month window.
Right, and that's what I'm going to be suggesting for, especially for the construction or for the facilities, because we won't be spending that money in 6 months. We won't be spending it, probably for another year. So that's what, I'll be when I give it to Mr. Mixon to approve. I'll be asking for that time frame.
What type of return on investments are you?
Actually, right now, we're noticing some that we purchased in March and May of last year, and for $250,000 U.S. Treasury, it was 4.125%.
That's pretty good.
Is extraordinary.
Pretty good. That's, my city would like some advice from you. I was just watching their review.
Well, it was 18 months and $250,000. Those were the two criteria that we could figure out. That's just because at the same time we had purchased $100,000 ones for a year, and they were still sub half.
Yeah.
It was less than 0.5%.
Yeah.
So, in fact, the commissioners thought it was a typo.
And they
4
saw
and
the
an
four.
eighth? What?
No, they're all
Where'd you
wanting to
get
know
4
where
and
you're
an
putting
eighth?
that, because they're going to put theirs there.
Well,
No, it is a great
the last ones we purchased were 4 and an eighth.
Yeah, that's a great return.
But they were $250,000. I mean, we purchased some other ones since then that were $100,000, but they were still sub half.
Wow.
So it was the combination of, I think, the length and the amount.
And the timing.
Yeah.
Cool. Questions? Jesse, we put all the pressure on you. Remember, before the video started, we said you had to be the guy to ask all the questions.
1999, that was the year. 4 and an 8. Anything else?
Everybody was worried about Y2K at that time.
That's right. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate the input. Anything else on the Investment Act training that we need to be able to be officially trained?
You are now officially trained.
I'm happy to make copies of the video.
For 2 years.
I think we should make our own next year. Can you see if we can get ACE credit for that? I think for the next go-round, we'll make our own video. Okay, let's move to a discussion regarding action items from today to bring forward to future board meetings. Floor is open. We've had lots of good broad-based conversation. Is there anything that someone feels like we need further information on?
Talking about in addition to the regular slate of presentations we get at our meetings or quarterly meetings.
Yeah, and I guess unless legal counsel just started absolutely thumping us in the head, Mr. Barber, I'd be okay with if you've got some great idea that's been floating around that you haven't felt like you've had a chance to vet. Let's throw it out here and see if we can make it match this agenda.
This agenda was wide open.
I know, that's what I'm saying. Let's throw it out there. I'm not sure he's creative, so he might could come up with something that gets nowhere close.
I don't know, I'm thinking moonwalking.
I'm not sure I can make that match. No, I mean, I think we've got a pretty good game plan as we move forward. Certainly, you've got a full agenda tomorrow. I would encourage you to take a look at that package because it's chocked full of information. Maybe just as a quick reminder in case you haven't had a chance to get through there, and just for clarification in case I'm wrong, I believe that there is an expectation tomorrow that you would get nominations from the floor to begin to create your executive team for the coming year. So I'm not trying to invite conversation right now. I just want to remind you of that because that's different than what we've done in the past. And so if you haven't given any thought to that, you might want to do that.
Is the executive committee going to make a presentation of who they've?
No, sir. It's my understanding, and from a global understanding of it, that the recommendation this board adopted was that the nominations would absolutely come from the floor. That there was no desire to have the executive committee present to you a slate of officers, and since that's different than what we've always done, I wanted to remind you of that.
We had suggested it and vetted it, but the board decided.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. I thought it was both. I thought you could do both.
No, and I, credit where credit's due, or he's not here to defend himself, but I think Mr. De La Garza was the voice that said he felt like it was more appropriate if they just came from the floor. And there was no opposition to that, so I believe that's what we've adopted. So since it's different, again, I just wanted to remind you of that.
And that policy is in your materials behind that item. So if you're concerned about the exact wording, it's in there.
Okay. Again, the floor's open. I want to be sure I don't miss something. Your great ideas are important to us.
Well, just a quick reminder, not a great idea, but our meeting starts at 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Yeah, and that is something, and that is something different because I have had 2 or 3 people reach out and say, "Whoa, I wasn't expecting that." In fact, I've had a couple of people ask me, including maybe people that we are honoring, to move some things around on the agenda, so you can expect me to do a little shuck and jive with you tomorrow. I'm going to move some things around to make it accommodate people's schedules because we don't usually start this early. But we're trying to get you out of here before 5 o'clock on Friday night.
I'm totally okay with that. No, from a logistical standpoint, it's tough. Mr. Beard knows my pains. You get to the airport, and you miss a flight, and you have to stay the night, because there's only one flight out of town.
If you travel 35 like I do, you would feel my pain, because it doesn't, if I leave here at 5 o'clock, I might be the next day getting home as well, but it's not for the same problem.
Are we gonna go through lunch? I mean, that would help.
It gets a good conversation. I get feedback both ways from you guys, and certainly topics open for conversation. Some of you need to eat or feel like you need to eat, and some of you give me those looks like, please keep moving. So.
Well, I would like, I mean, I'm driving, so I'm the same way. I need to get on the road by 3. So I'm all for, if we're starting at 9 and we work through lunch, jeez. Well, be able to for sure be through by 3.
Again, if you haven't looked at it very closely, there is going to be a complaint issue that, holy cow, I started reading that and I'm like, when is this thing going to end?
Yeah, no, you're right.
It's got federal, it's got state, it's got all kinds of issues tied in.
Be careful
there.
about that.
Yeah, we can talk about that tomorrow.
Specific.
I just bring up there's some time-consuming elements on the agenda.
Yeah, not to throw down the gauntlet or anything, but we had the commission meetings on Monday and Tuesday of this week, and they started at 9, and we were out of here by 12:30.
Okay, and that is always driven by public in front of us, which obviously we're going to hear, and then how much conversation you guys want to have. I'll remind you that this group, if you've read the materials you've got, you don't have to reread to us your committee reports. 3 or 4 highlights that let the public know, because those materials are also available on our website, right? The committee report in full vetting is available to the public if they want it. That would be one way we could increase efficiency.
Well, and not to discourage any frank public discussion of all of the items on our agenda.
Yeah, we never expected that you intended that.
And the consent agenda, of course, is set so that if you really don't have any questions, you can dispose of them all in one motion.
That is another good training point. Again, sometimes I think we forget that the reason it's listed as consent is all you have to, first, we want to ask if there's anything in particular that, and we can pull a single item off and not have to talk about every single one of them. All right. Again, I want to be sure that everybody's great ideas or general comments are out there. So one more shot. Anybody got anything?
Do we have an ad hoc committee on the building?
Yes, we did
Is there
assign
a
one.
report on that?
Not yet.
Not yet. At least it's not on your agenda.
Okay.
We're having an ad hoc meeting after this meeting.
Yeah. Doug's gonna fill me in on that. Update me.
I've got the time at 4:17. If there is no further business before this organization for this workshop, we'll consider ourselves adjourned.